Welcome to Sleep for Stories. Thank you for joining us on this relaxing and mysterious journey. Let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from and what time it is for you. If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give this video a thumbs up, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any future tales. Wishing you a peaceful listening experience and a restful sleep. The first days of September brought with them a cool breeze that rustled the leaves of the trees. Rachel and Michael, a young couple deeply in love, were preparing for the day they had both dreamed of for years, their wedding day. The venue was set in a grand local hotel, a beautiful ballroom that could hold hundreds of guests, and every detail had been planned to perfection. The flowers were arranged just so, the cake was flawless, and the invitations had gone out without a hitch. But beneath the surface of this perfect day, something far darker was beginning to stir. Rachel had always dreamed of a fairy tale wedding. The dress was everything she had ever wanted, elegant, intricate, and timeless. Michael, her soon-to-be husband, was equally excited, but in a more laid-back manner. He was happy as long as he saw Rachel smile. The night was set to be magical, a night they would both remember forever. Yet, there was one thing they hadn't anticipated: the old family heirloom Rachel wore around her neck, a pendant passed down from her grandmother, said to bring good fortune. But no one told Rachel that this very pendant carried with it an ancient curse, a secret only known to her grandmother, who had mysteriously passed away years ago. The pendant had once belonged to a woman who died on her wedding night. Her love never returned. Some say she had been marked by the spirit of a vengeful lover. As the day unfolded and guests began to gather, Rachel felt an uneasy chill. She brushed it off, dismissing it as nerves. But as she entered the grand ballroom in her gown, a strange sensation of being watched overtook her. The room was filled with the scent of roses and candlelight. Yet, something in the air felt wrong. A sudden, inexplicable cold spread through the room, and the guests' voices seemed to fade into a murmur, as if something else was whispering just beyond the edge of their hearing. Michael noticed it too. He turned to her, his eyes filled with concern. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. Rachel smiled nervously. "I'm just a little anxious. It's nothing." But as the night progressed, strange things began to happen. The lights flickered, a sudden gust of wind swept through the ballroom, and the music began to distort, playing in odd, eerie intervals. At first, the guests thought it was a technical glitch or a draft from an open window. But then, Rachel felt a cold hand brushing against her back, the unmistakable feeling of being touched by something unseen. The first few moments of laughter and joy quickly turned to uneasy glances as the atmosphere shifted. The air grew heavier. The chandeliers above swayed unnaturally, casting shadows that moved across the walls like restless spirits. Then one of the guests, an elderly woman who had known Rachel's grandmother, whispered something to her husband. Her face drained of color as she looked at Rachel. "You must leave," the woman whispered, her voice shaky. "Curse, it's returning." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. She turned toward her grandmother's pendant, which had somehow grown warm to the touch. The woman's words haunted her, but Rachel dismissed them. This was her day, her happiness. Wedding. But in the back of her mind, a sense of dread had already taken root. As the evening wore on, things took an even darker turn. The guests started to notice the strange happenings: chairs moving on, glass shattering without cause. And then, most chilling of all, the eerie, distorted sound of a woman crying out from somewhere deep within the ballroom, though no one could see from where. Rachel, now visibly shaken, excused herself for a moment, stepping into the hallway to compose herself. The corridor was dark, lit only by the faint glow of candle sconces. She ran her fingers over the pendant again, feeling a pulse beneath the cool surface. It was as if it was alive, pulling her toward something. Just then, the lights flickered again, and the door to the ballroom slammed shut with a force that rattled the walls. The sound echoed down the hall as the air grew unnaturally cold. Rachel's breath became shallow, and her heart raced in her chest. She turned to see a shadow move toward her from the far end of the hall, its shape shifting like smoke, its presence malevolent. She turned to run, but the shadow was faster. It blocked her path, and from the darkness, she heard a faintly whisper that chilled her to her core. "Your happiness will never be." Rachel froze, her body gripped by fear. The air around her was thick, as though the walls of the hallway were closing in. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. The sound came out! Shadowy figure moved closer, its form swirling like smoke, yet its presence was all too real, cold, heavy, and suffocating. It seemed to watch her, waiting for her to react. Who are you?" Rachel managed to whisper, her voice trembling with dread. The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, it drifted closer, its features still shrouded in darkness, its form flickering as if it couldn't decide whether it was real or not. Then, it spoke, its voice low, almost a hiss, and chilling to the bone. "I am the one who was forgotten, the one who was never meant to be left behind." Rachel's heart hammered in her chest. The words felt like they were echoing in her very soul. She took a step back, but the figure was faster. It reached out with a cold, ethereal hand and gripped her wrist, pulling her closer. The sensation was like ice being injected into her veins, a deep, unyielding cold that spread throughout her entire body. "You're the one, aren't you?" the figure whispered. "The one who dared to wear the pendant." Rachel's mind spun. Her grandmother's pendant, it had always been a symbol of luck, a cherished family heirloom. But now, in this moment, it felt like a chain, binding her to tame, binding her to something ancient and evil. "You can't have me," she cried, yanking her arm away. But the shadow's grip tightened. "Your fate was sealed long ago," the figure hissed, its voice growing darker. "You, like your grandmother before you, will never escape me. The curse was passed down through, will never escape me. The curse was passed down through a bloodline. It lives in you, Rachel, and now it will claim you as it claimed her." Rachel stumbled backward, her heart racing as everything she knew seemed to unravel before her eyes. The figure began to materialize fully, revealing a woman, pale, almost translucent, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare straight through her. The woman's face was twisted in sorrow, her lips moving as if trapped in a never-ending lament. "The curse lives in every piece of the family's blood," the woman continued, her voice a low, mournful echo. "The moment you touched the pendant, you woke me up. You woke the vengeful spirit of a bride whose life was stolen. And now, on your wedding day, you too will never know the joy of love." Rachel's mind raced. She thought of Michael, the man she was about to marry, the man she loved. He had no idea of the curse that ran through her family, the deadly secret tied to that pendant. She could feel the grip of fate tightening around her, and a deep sense of dread settled in her heart. "No," Rachel screamed. "I won't let this happen. I won't let you take me." But the woman's form began to melt away into the mist, her laughter echoing in the air. "You can't escape your fate, Rachel. The curse is already inside you." Suddenly, the door to the ballroom burst open with a crash, and Rachel spun around to find Michael standing in the doorway, his face twisted in confusion and concern. "Rachel, where did you go?" The fog lifted slightly, and the temperature in the hallway returned to normal, but Rachel knew better. She could still feel the dark presence lingering, pressing against her from all sides. The shadow had not fully vanished. It was still had not fully vanished. There, waiting, ready to finish what it had started. Michael rushed to her side, his face full of worry. "Rachel, you're pale. What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." Tears filled Rachel's eyes as she looked at him, her heart torn. She had wanted to tell him, to warn him, but how could she explain something so impossible? Something so beyond the realm of understanding? "The pendant," she whispered, barely able to breathe. "It's cursed, Michael. It's not just a piece of jewelry. It's part of something dark, something that has haunted my family for generations." Michael shook his head, disbelief in iterations. His eyes. "No, Rachel, it can't be. This is your day, our day. We're getting married tonight. Nothing can ruin that." But Rachel felt the chill once again, the icy touch of the shadow creeping back into her mind. She didn't know how much time they had left before the curse took its full hold. She knew the shadow would be back, and that it would want more than just her. It wanted everything. And that night, under the flickering lights of the ballroom, as Rachel and Michael exchanged vows, the shadow watched from the corners of the room, waiting for the final moment when Rachel would be taken, just as the woman had been taken all those years ago. The curse was not done with her. As the ceremony continued, Rachel tried to focus on Michael's words, on the joy of the moment, but it was impossible. Her mind raced with the dark whispers, the cold presence lurking at the edge of her consciousness. She could feel the curse tightening around her like a noose, every passing minute dragging her closer to something inevitable. She tried to push it aside, tried to force herself to be present, to be happy. She looked at Michael, smiling through the tension, but deep inside, she knew the truth this night. She knew the truth this night was doomed. The shadow was watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. The reception hall was filled with music, laughter, and the clinking of glasses, but Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The lights flickered, again, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. The air seemed to thicken, and Rachel could feel her breath growing shallow. She clutched the pendant around her neck, the warmth of it now a constant reminder of the curse. Michael turned to her, his face full of excitement. "Are you enjoying the night, darling? It's everything we wanted, right?" Rachel forced a smile, but her heart wasn't in it. "It's perfect," she lied, but her eyes kept scanning the room, searching for any sign of the shadow. Horizon. Suddenly, a cold wind blew through the hall. The candles flickered wildly, casting the room into darkness for a brief moment. Gasps of confusion filled the air, but no one seemed to notice the oppressive weight that Rachel felt. Rachel felt was as if the very air around her had become charged with a dark energy, and she knew the moment had come. The music stopped abruptly. The guests, puzzled, looked around. Rachel turned to Michael, her voice barely a whisper. "We need to, Michael." Her voice barely a whisper. "Leave. Now," Michael frowned, sensing her fear. "Rachel, what's going on? You're scaring me." But before she could respond, a loud crash echoed from across the room. The doors to the ballroom burst open, and the temperature dropped sharply. A figure stepped through the doorway, a shadowy figure, cloaked in mist, its face hidden in darkness. Its presence was overpowering, filling the room with a sense of dread. The guests froze, not sure if they should run or stay. Rachel's heart sank as she saw it. The curse, the shadow, had come for her. "Michael, Michael, Michael," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's here." The figure moved toward them, its form flickering and changing, as though it could not decide whether it was real or not. Rachel felt an icy chill wash over her as it drew closer, its gaze fixed on her. It spoke then, in a voice that seemed to echo in the very walls of the room, a voice that sent a shiver down her spine. "Your fate was sealed the moment you wore the pendant," the shadow said, its voice cold and hollow. Just as yours cold and hollow. Grandmother's fate was sealed before you, and now you will join her. Michael stepped in front of Rachel, trying to protect her. But the shadow simply moved through him, as though he were no more than air. His body shuddered as the chill passed through him, and he turned to Rachel, his eyes wide with terror. "Rachel, what is happening?" he gasped, his voice filled with confusion and fear. "What is this thing?" Before Rachel could answer, the figure reached out, its hand like a blade of ice, and touched her cheek. The moment it made contact, flooded with visions of a woman, a bride, standing in a dark, cold room, her wedding dress torn and stained. The woman's face was distorted in agony, her eyes wide with fear and sadness. The visions flashed, and Rachel saw her grandmother, the woman who had once worn the pendant, standing at the altar, alone. The same shadowy figure stood behind her, its cold hand reaching out to claim her. Rachel gasped, her hand clutching her throat as the truth settled in. The curse wasn't just about the pendant. It was about the bloodline, her bloodline. Every woman who had worn it had been marked, doomed to die on her wedding night, her love stolen by the vengeful spirit that had haunted the family for generations. The shadow's voice echoed in her mind, cruel and cold. "You will never know happiness. You will never know happiness. Loved. The curse will claim you, just as it claimed her." Rachel's knees went weak, and she collapsed into Michael's arms, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I never wanted you to be part of it." But Michael, holding her tightly, refused to let go. "I love you, Rachel. We'll figure this out. We'll find a way to fight this." But as he spoke, the shadow loomed over them, and the room grew darker. The guests screamed and ran, but the shadow was already upon them. It began to pull at the very fabric of reality, bending the air and the light around it. The walls seemed to close in, and the room became a distorted, nightmarish version of itself. The music resumed, but it was a dissonant, haunting melody, like the echoes of a forgotten time. Rachel felt the coldness spread through her entire body. The shadow was stronger now, feeding off the fear and the pain that filled the room. It was closing in, ready to the room, claim what it had always come for. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, everything stopped. The shadow vanished, and the room returned to silence. Rachel gasped, her eyes darting around. The ballroom was empty now. The guests gone? The guests gone? The air still and heavy with a sense of finality. Rachel and Michael stood alone in the center of the room, surrounded by the remnants of their ruined wedding. "We can't stay here," Rachel whispered, her voice shaky. "It's not over. The air is still. Curse. It's still following us." Rachel and Michael stood there, the weight of the silence pressing down on them. The once vibrant ballroom, filled with laughter and joy, was now a shell of itself, empty, hollow, as if it had never held any life at all. The remnants of the wedding, the flowers, the decorations, the laughter were now twisted memories of what should have been. Rachel's breath was shallow, and her body shook with fear, but she couldn't stop herself from glancing over her shoulder, as if expecting the shadow to return at any moment. Michael, still holding her, turned his gaze toward the now empty doorway where the shadow had emerged. It was as though it had never been there at all, but the chilling presence still lingered in the air. "Just happened?" Michael asked, his voice shaky, disbelief still etched on his face. "Where did everyone go? What was that thing?" "I don't know," Rachel whispered, the words trembling in her throat. She tried to force a steady breath, but every part of her felt like it was drowning. "It was the curse, Michael. It's been haunting my family for generations. My new grandmother. She wore the pendant, and it came for her too." Michael's eyes widened as he took a step back. You said you didn't believe in all this. This can't be real, Rachel. You're telling me a curse. It's real, Rachel nodded, the weight of the truth crashing over her. I didn't want to believe it either, but everything that happened tonight, it's all connected. The pendant, the wedding, it's been set in motion for years. And now it's my turn. Her heart hammered as she clutched the pendant tighter. The warm, faint glow that had once comforted her now felt like a death sentence. Where do we go now? Michael asked, his voice low, desperation creeping in. How do we stop this? Rachel wiped her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. I don't know. I wish I did. But whatever happens, we can't run. Not anymore. The curse. It's part of me now. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped sharply, sending a shiver through Rachel's spine. The chandeliers above flickered again, casting long shadows that danced and stretched unnaturally across the walls. The air seemed to thicken, and the once quiet ballroom now hummed with a presence that felt heavier, darker than. From the corner of the room, the same distorted, low voice that had spoken before emerged. But this time, it wasn't just a whisper. It was a low growl, like the voice of something ancient, its very words vibrating through the floor. You cannot escape me, Rachel. The hair on Rachel's neck stood on end. The voice echoed through the room, vibrating the very walls. What do you want? Rachel cried out, her voice breaking as she turned toward the source of the sound. Why me? Why my family? The voice seemed to laugh, a cold, cruel sound that echoed through the vast emptiness of the ballroom. I want what has always been mine. You have broken the seal, Rachel. You have opened the door. You have invited me back. And now you're have invited me back. Love is mine. Rachel felt the air grow colder still, and as she looked around, the shadows seemed to writhe and move, as though they were alive. The coldness spread through her body, as though the very air itself was trying to suffocate her. No, Michael shouted, his voice filled with panic. You don't have to do this, Rachel. We can find another way. We can leave. But Rachel knew. She knew the truth now. There was no running from this. The curse had always been there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its moment, and that moment had come. I'm sorry, Michael, Rachel whispered, her voice hoarse. I'm so sorry. I wish I could protect you, but this is bigger than us. Suddenly, the shadow in the room grew in size, expanding and swirling like a dark cloud. It stretched and moved toward them, an overwhelming force that seemed to draw in the light around it. The once beautiful chandeliers above flickered, and the room grew darker until it was consumed entirely by the blackness. Michael turned to face Rachel, his face pale. What do we do now? What do we do now? We can't just stand here. We need to get out. But it was too late. The shadow moved faster now, its tendrils creeping toward them, its cold touch brushing against Rachel's skin, making her feel as though her very soul was being pulled out of her. She screamed in agony, but it was a screamed in agony. But it was a screamed in agony. But it was a screamed in agony of despair, of inevitability. The shadow reached out, wrapping around Rachel, its form twisting and shifting like smoke as it enveloped her. The air was filled with a deafening silence. Everything stopped, and then, just as suddenly as it pulled me, as Eljon El Bao or two had begun, the darkness faded. The room fell quiet again, and the light returned, though it was dim and weak. Rachel and Michael stood in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by the wreckage of the ceremony, broken glass, overturned chairs, and the lingering sense of a curse that could never be undone. Rachel gasped for air, her breath coming in ragged sobs She felt different. The weight of the curse had lifted, but something else had taken its place. The shadow had left its mark, and now Rachel was no longer the woman she had been before. The curse had taken its toll. "I'm sorry, Michael," Rachel whispered again, her voice barely audible. "I couldn't save us." Michael reached for her, his hands trembling as us. Michael reached for her, his hands trembling as up. He took her face in his hands. "We'll find a way, Rachel. We'll find a way to break this." But deep down, they both knew the truth. There was no breaking the curse. Not now. Not ever. The ballroom, once filled with light and joy, now stood with light and joy. Now stood with light and joy. Now stood as a tomb, a reminder of the darkness that had claimed them both. The silence in the ballroom was oppressive, a thick, suffocating stillness that clung to the air. Rachel and Michael stood there, frozen in place, the weight of the curse heavy on their shoulders. The shadows that had once consumed the room had receded, but the presence of something dark and ancient still lingered, like a distant hum in the back of their minds. Michael's hands trembled as he held Rachel, his heart beating wildly in his chest. "We can't just stay here," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "We need to get out of this place. We can't let this curse, this thing, follow us." Rachel looked up at him, her eyes hollow and filled with despair. "There's nowhere to run, Michael," she whispered. "The curse, it's part of me now. We've awakened it. It's inside me." Michael shook his head, trying to push the panic back. "No, Rachel. We'll find a way." "Well, but his—" Words faltered as he looked around the room. The wreckage of their wedding scattered across the floor. The grand hall, once filled with joy, now felt like a prison. The walls seemed to close in, and the heavy air pressed down on them, suffocating every hope they had. Suddenly, the doors to the ballroom slammed shut with a deafening bang. Michael jumped back, his breath catching in his throat. The sound echoed through the empty hall like the final judgment. A cold gust of wind swept through the room, but there were no open windows. The temperature dropped sharply once again, and Rachel shivered, feeling the presence of the curse closing in. The lights flickered, casting long, jagged shadows across the walls, and the familiar sound of distant music began to play. But it wasn't the wedding song anymore. It was distorted, warping into a haunting, eerie melody that seemed to grow louder with every passing second. The walls seemed to tremble with every passing second sound, and Rachel felt her heart race in response. "What's happening?" Michael whispered, his voice tight with fear. "Why is the music changing?" Rachel clutched the pendant around her neck, feeling it pulse against her skin, as if it were alive. She could feel the curse, the ancient force, feeding off her fear. It was only growing stronger. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged, not the same dark, shadowy figure they had seen before, but something else, something more corporeal, more solid. It was a woman, but her features were twisted, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes sunken and hollow. Her long, flowing bridal gown was torn, stained with something dark, something red. Rachel gasped as the woman moved toward them, her steps slow and deliberate. Her eyes locked onto Rachel with an intensity that felt like it was piercing her very soul. "No, Rachel, Rachel," whispered, her voice cracking. "You're not real. You can't be." The woman didn't speak, but as she drew closer, the temperature dropped even further. Her presence was like a cold wind, suffocating, pulling at Rachel's very essence. Michael took a step forward, his voice full of protective fury. "Stay away from her," he shouted, but his words fell on deaf ears. The woman didn't acknowledge him. She simply moved toward Rachel, her eyes never leaving her, her hollow gaze filled with a deep, unyielding sorrow. "You awakened me." The woman finally spoke. Her awakened me. The woman finally spoke. Her voice soft but chilling. "And now You will join me? Rachel stepped back, panic rising in her chest. No, you're not. The woman reached out, her bony fingers brushing Rachel's cheek. The moment her fingers made contact, Rachel's vision blurred. She felt as though her very life force was being drained from her, as if the shadowy woman were siphoning her soul. The room around them seemed to warp and distort, like the very fabric of reality was unraveling. Michael tried to grab her, but the woman's gaze turned toward him. Her eyes burned with an icy, unnatural light, and the temperature in it. The room dropped even further. Michael's breath became shallow, and he stumbled back as if an invisible force were pushing him away. Michael! Rachel cried out, but the woman's grip on her tightened, drawing her closer as if the curse was binding them together. The woman's lips twisted into a faint smile. You thought you could escape me? She murmured, her voice echoing with the weight of centuries. But you never caught. You never will. Rachel felt her knees give way as the woman's presence suffocated her. But just as everything seemed to blur into darkness, a voice familiar and comforting called out to her, Rachel, you have to fight it. You can't give in. Rachel's eyes fluttered open, and through the haze of darkness, she saw him. Michael. His face was filled with fear, but also determination. He was reaching out to her, his hand out to her, trembling but resolute. You can fight this, Michael urged. Fight it for us. Don't let it take you. Rachel's breath came in ragged gasps as the woman's grip loosened. The cold was still there, but Michael's voice was like a lifeline, pulling her back from the abyss. The pendant around Rachel's neck began to glow faintly, a soft light that pushed back the darkness. Rachel closed her eyes, focusing on Michael's voice, on the love they shared, and with every ounce of strength she had left, she pulled herself free from the woman's grip. No, Rachel whispered, her voice filled with conviction. I'm not like you. I won't become like you. The woman shrieked in rage, her form flickering as if it were being torn apart. The shadow that had followed Rachel for so long was weakening, its hold on her faltering. You will never be free, the woman hissed, but her voice grew fainter with each passing second. The curse will follow you forever, with ever. One final guttural scream. The woman dissolved into the air, her form dissipating like smoke, leaving only a lingering, icy cold in her wake. The ballroom fell silent once again, the oppressive presence of the curse vanishing like it had never been there. Rachel collapsed into Michael's arms, her body trembling with exhaustion, but her heart filled with relief. The curse was broken, for now, at least. We did it, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Michael held her tightly, his heart still racing. It's over, he repeated, but there was a lingering uncertainty in his eyes. For now? Rachel looked around the empty ballroom, the remnants of their wedding scattered across the floor. The broken pieces of a night that was supposed to be their beginning had now become their end. But in that moment, with Michael holding her, Rachel knew one thing for certain. The curse was not gone completely. It might have retreated, but it would always be watching, waiting for the next chance to strike. And she would never forget the woman, the bride, who had once been just like her. But Rachel had survived, and as long as she had Michael by her side, she would fight to keep the curse from claiming her. The night seemed to hold its breath as Rachel and Michael stood in the center of the ballroom, the silence settling heavily around them. The guests were gone. The celebration turned to dust, and the ballroom was eerily still. Yet, despite the woman's disappearance, despite the fact that the curse had momentarily released its grip on her, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that something was still very much wrong. Michael held her close, his hands trembling against her rosy back, but even he couldn't mask the unease in his eyes. It's over, right? He asked, his voice shaky. That thing is gone? Rachel didn't answer immediately. Instead, her eyes scanned the empty ballroom, lingering on the once gleaming chandeliers that now appeared to sway faintly, casting long, unnatural shadows across the walls. The cold was gone, but it had left an unsettling chill in the air. Her grandmother's pendant, once warm against her skin, now felt heavy and almost suffocating. "I don't know," Rachel whispered, her voice filled with uncertainty. "I wish I could say yes, but I feel like we haven't seen the last of it." Suddenly, the lights flickered again, plunging the room into darkness. Rachel's heart skipped a beat as a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles and creating a sharp, eerie stillness. "Michael is so spared to our courtranai," immediately pulled her closer, instinctively shielding her. "Not again," Michael murmured, his voice filled with dread. Then, as if on cue, the sound of footsteps echoed from the far end of the ballroom. Slow, measured, or something was walking toward them through the darkness, its presence undeniable. "Who's there?" Rachel called, her voice trembling with fear. But the answer came not in words, but in a sound, a sharp, bone-chilling laugh, distorted and hollow, that seemed to resonate from all directions at once. The air became thick again, charged with air, became thick again, charged with an oppressive energy. And then, as the footsteps grew louder, the figure emerged from the shadows. It wasn't the woman, the bride, but it was something equally terrifying. A tall, imposing figure draped in tattered robes, its face obscured by a dark hood. In its hands, it held a long, curved staff, the end of which was adorned with an ancient, glowing symbol, a symbol that resembled the very runes on Rachel's pendant. The figure stopped at the center of the ballroom, standing still, at the center of the ballroom, standing still and silent for a moment. Rachel's heart raced in her chest, and she could feel Michael's grip tighten around her. She wanted to speak, to demand answers, but the presence of the figure was suffocating. "Who are you?" Rachel finally asked, her voice quivering but steady. "What do you want from us?" The figure's head tilted slightly, as if it were studying her. Then it spoke, its voice low, rumbling, as if it carried the weight of centuries. "The curse is not over, Rachel," the figure said, its voice laced with ancient malice. "It has laced with ancient malice. It has merely found a new vessel. You thought you could escape it, but the curse runs deeper than you realize." Rachel's breath caught in her throat. The words sent a shiver down her spine. The curse inside her wasn't gone. It had only shifted. It seemed. "What do you mean?" Michael demanded, stepping in front of Rachel, his voice filled with protective fury. "What do you want from her? Why are you doing this?" The figure did not answer immediately. Instead, it took a step forward, its dark presence filling the space with every movement. The air grew colder, thicker, the walls seemed to close in, and the dim light from the flickering chandeliers seemed to fade further, leaving the room bathed in an eerie glow. "The curse is not merely a force," the figure said, its voice filled with ancient sorrow. "It is a cycle that can never truly be broken. The woman you encountered before, she was the first, a bride whose love was stolen, her soul trapped within the curse. And now, Rachel, you are the next to carry it. The bloodline calls to me." Rachel felt her stomach drop. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to be a part of this." "You never asked," the figure interrupted, its voice filled with a dark finality. "But you are tied to the curse now. The pendant, the blood, the vows you made tonight, they have all sealed your fate." Michael stepped forward again, his body rigid with anger. I don't care about your curse," he said, his voice low but filled with determination. "I'll fight you. I'll fight you I'll fight this thing until my last breath if I fight. Have to. The figure laughed a deep, sorrowful sound, as if mocking him. You cannot fight what is already inside you, Michael. The curse is already rooted in your hearts. You will both face it. And when it comes for you, there will be big. Comes for you, there will nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. As the figure raised its staff, the room seemed to darken further, the shadows stretching long and wide. Rachel felt the cold, suffocating grip of the curse tightening around her chest. Her vision blurred, rolling, trying, winding, Risha crawlers tightening around her chest. Her vision blurred, and for a moment, she felt as though she was slipping into something beyond the physical realm, a world of darkness and despair, where nothing was real and everything was lost. But then, in that moment of pure dread, Rachel heard something, a voice, faint but insistent. It was Michael. She turned to look at him, and for the briefest moment, their eyes met, filled with love and determination. They weren't alone in this fight. They would stand together, no matter what. The figure's form flickered as it raised its staff higher, preparing to unleash its power. But before it could strike, a loud crash echoed through the ballroom. The figure paused, its head snapping toward the noise. Something had shifted. And the noise is shakti and something had changed. The figure paused, its attention now fixed on the source of the crashing sound. For a brief moment, the oppressive atmosphere lifted, as if the very air was holding its breath. Rachel could feel the shift in the room. Something had changed, and for the first time in what felt like hours, there was a sense of possibility, of hope. Before she could react, the source of the noise revealed itself, a figure stepping out of the shadows, tall and cloaked in dark robes. This new figure was not the same as the menacing presence before them, though it was equally shrouded in mystery. The man, or was it a man, moved with a purpose, his steps firm and deliberate. Rachel's heart skipped a beat when she recognized him. "Grandfather," she whispered, her voice hoarse, her eyes wide with disbelief. The figure nodded, his face still hidden beneath his hood, but his presence unmistakable. There was no mistaking it. This was someone who had been long gone. Someone Rachel had been long gone. Someone Rachel had thought was lost to time. "Grandfather, what is this?" Rachel asked, her voice trembling. "What's happening? What is that thing?" The figure that had been threatening them, the dark entity with the staff, snarled in irritation, his eyes narrowing as he watched the newcomer. "You dare interfere?" it hissed. "This is not your battle." But the man, Rachel's grandfather, was unmoved. He stepped forward, and as he did, the shadows around him seemed to part, as though they recognized him and feared him. The air grew less cold, and fear grew less cold, and fear. Oppressive weight lifted slightly, though the dark presence still lingered. "The battle has never been mine to fight," Rachel's grandfather said, his voice calm, but filled with a power that made the dark figure recoil. "But it is my family's. You have no place here." The shadowy figure's form flickered, its face twisting into a mask of rage. "You abandoned us. You left her. You left me," it growled. Rachel felt the ground beneath her tremble. The moment her grandfather had spoken, it was clear that this was no ordinary encounter. Her grandfather had once been part of this curse, part of the ancient bloodline. His return wasn't just a twist of fate, it was a reckoning. "Grandfather, what do you mean?" Rachel whispered. "What is this curse?" Her grandfather removed his hood, revealing a face she had seen only in pictures. But it was older now, worn with the weight of years. He had a solemn look in his eyes, yet a deep understanding of the world that no one else had. "The curse was never broken," he said softly. "We thought it was, many years ago, but it was merely lying dormant, waiting for the right moment to awaken. Your grandmother and I tried to shield our family from it, but I see now it was never truly gone. Rachel's mind spun. Her grandfather's words were cryptic, but they filled her with more questions than answers. But the pendant, the one my grandmother left for me, she said. It's supposed to protect me, she said. It's supposed to protect me? She said it was a gift. Grandfather's gaze softened, but there was sorrow in his eyes. The pendant was never a gift. It was a binding, a trap, a piece of the curse passed down through generations. Your grandmother wore it, and so did I, until I knew what it truly was. I tried to destroy it, but it was too late. It had already claimed too much. Rachel felt the ground beneath her feet shift as the dark figure roared in fury. Enough of your lies, it screamed, raising its staff high above its head, its power crackling in the air. I will take what is mine. But Rachel's grandfather wasn't afraid. He raised his hand, and a faint golden light began to emanate from him, pushing the darkness back. The time has come to end this, he said. I won't let it claim another soul. As he spoke, the thick ballroom around them seemed to distort. The walls warped, the ceiling stretched upward, and the air grew thick with magic, an ancient, powerful force that had been dormant for centuries, now waking with full force. The shadowy figure's form began to flicker, as if it were being torn apart by the very magic her grandfather wielded. It hissed, its voice filled with rage and despair. You cannot destroy me. You can never destroy me. Rachel, standing frozen in the midst of it all, suddenly understood. Her grandfather wasn't just fighting for his family or for her. He was fighting for the entire bloodline, for the curse that had haunted their ancestors and now was trying to claim her. As the figure screamed in agony, Rachel's heart raced. She wanted to help. She wanted to fight this thing with every ounce of her being. But how? She had no power, no ability to stand against the ancient curse that had been haunting her family for generations. Rachel, her grandfather said softly, looking at her with an intense gaze. The pendant, it can't be destroyed, but it can be destroyed, unbound. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? You're the key, he said. The pendant was passed to you for a reason. It's time to use it. Together we can end this. Rachel nodded, her resolve hardening. She reached up to clutch the pendant, feeling its warmth against her skin, and as her fingers brushed against it, she felt a surge of energy and ancient power coursing through her veins. The room seemed to pulse with the energy that had once been lost, but now it was waking. The shadowy figure screamed in agony as Rachel felt the pendant react to her touch. It was glowing brighter now, the runes on it flashing with blinding light. No, you can't, the figure screamed, but it was too late. With one final surge of energy, Rachel lifted the pendant high, her voice steady and firm. Be gone, she whispered, and never return. The darkness howled, its form unraveling, its cries echoing through the ballroom, and then, with a flash of light that filled the room, it was gone. For a long moment, the room was still. The only sound was Rachel's breath, slow and steady, as the heavy weight that had clung to the air finally lifted. The curse, at least for now, had been broken. Her grandfather, weary but resolute, turned to her. It's over, he said softly, the weight of centuries lifting from his shoulders. Rachel, exhausted but relieved, collapsed into his lifting from his shoulders. Michael's arms. It's finally over, she whispered, the words almost too much to believe. But as she looked down at the pendant in her hand, she knew that it was not truly the end. The curse had been banished, but it would always be watching. But it would always be watching, always waiting, and Rachel, Michael, and their bloodline would have to remain vigilant. Though the curse had been momentarily vanquished, the remnants of its grip on Rachel, Michael, and their family still lingered in the air like a faint mist. The ballroom was quiet, unnaturally so, as the last echoes of the dark figure's scream faded into nothingness. The air, once heavy with a chilling presence, now seemed to hum with the remnants of ancient magic, fading but not entirely gone. Rachel's heart raced as she clutched the pendant tightly in her hand, still glowing faintly with the residual power of the curse. "I don't understand," Rachel whispered, her voice hoarse. "How can we be sure it's over?" Her grandfather stood silently, his expression grave as he surveyed the room. His earlier strength seemed to have faltered, as if the weight of the battle had finally taken its toll. He turned to face Rachel, his eyes tired but filled with But knowledge, it's not gone, Rachel, he said softly. The curse was broken in this moment, but the energy, the spirit is still out there, still lingering in the world. You've released it, and in doing so, you've created an opening for it to return. Rachel's blood ran cold. "You mean, it's not over?" "Not fully," he replied, his voice filled with a sadness Rachel had never heard before. "The curse is tied to your family's bloodline, to the very soul of your heritage. It will never truly go away, but the force that controlled it, that dark entity, has been pushed back. You've sealed it for now. The battle may come again, but for now, you are free." That the true cost of the curse wasn't just about breaking it. It was about the never-ending battle, the threat of it always returning, like a shadow that never fully dissipates. Michael stood by her side, his hand gently squeezing hers. "We can gently squeezing hers. We can handle it, Rachel. We've faced this together, and we'll face whatever comes next, together." But Rachel could only nod silently, a deep knot of worry tightening in her chest. She couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was far from over. She looked at her grandfather, trying to find answers, but his eyes seemed distant, like he was seeing something far beyond her. "You must leave this place," he said suddenly. "The ballroom, the pendant, everything is all connected. Longer you stay here, the more likely the curse will find its way back. It can use the memories, the sorrow, the fear. These walls hold more than just shadows, they hold pieces of what's been lost." Rachel's breath caught in her throat. "Are you saying we can't stay here?" Her grandfather nodded slowly. "This place was once the source of the curse, and now, after what has happened, it will become its new home. The spirit of the curse will cling to these walls, to the sorrow of what happened here. You must leave before it regains its strength. Go somewhere the energy has not yet taken root." Rachel turned to Michael, her heart heavy with the thought of leaving behind the place where she had dreamed of starting a new life. Their wedding day, their wedding day, their wedding day. Future, all shattered in an instant. But she knew her grandfather was right. The curse was no longer just something that had haunted her family. It was now a part of them, a part of everything they had touched. "Well, leave," she said softly, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "We'll start over. I'll do whatever it takes to keep us safe." Michael nodded, his face filled with determination. "We'll go together." But as they turned toward the door, ready to leave, the ballroom behind, a strange sound filled the air, a soft whisper, almost imperceptible at first, but growing louder by the second. It was a voice, faint, familiar, and filled with sorrow. "Rachel." The voice called her name, soft but insistent, as though it were coming from deep within the walls themselves. Rachel froze, her heart pounding in her chest. "No," she whispered, her eyes wide with horror. "Not again." Her grandfather's face twisted with dread. "It's not over," he said urgently. The curse is not fully broken. It has found another way in. You cannot leave yet. Rachel's breath came in short, more desperate. Rachel, don't listen to it, he said, his voice shaky. It's trying to pull you back. But the voice continued, growing stronger and more insistent, like a beckoning force that could not be ignored. I am here. I am always here. Rachel turned to her grandfather, her mind spinning with fear. What is it? What's happening? The curse is in the walls, her grandfather said, his voice tight with urgency. It lives here, inside the very heart of this place. And now it's calling you back. The walls of the ballroom seemed to pulse, as if they had a heartbeat of their own. The whispers were growing louder, almost suffocating, and Rachel felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. We have to leave now, her grandfather urged, grabbing her arm. There's no time to waste. But as he spoke, the ballroom began to shake. The floor cracked beneath them, and the ceiling above seemed to warp, as if the building itself was coming alive. The shadows that had once been only faint began to swell, rising up like dark tendrils, reaching for Rachel. Michael, Rachel cried out, panic flooding her chest. Help me! Michael grabbed her, pulling her toward the door, but the shadows were faster. The room itself seemed to reject them, as though it were trying to hold them captive. The figure of the woman, now fully materialized, appeared before them, her face twisted with malice and despair. You will never escape, the woman hissed, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. You belong to me. You belong to the curse. The shadows closed in, their grip tightening around Rachel and Michael. The air grew colder, suffocating, and Rachel could feel her strength waning as the shadows pressed against her, pulling her back into the heart of the ballroom. The shadows swirled around them, thickening with every passing second, as if the very walls of the ballroom were alive, pulling them into the darkness. Rachel's chest tightened, the coldness of the shadows seeping into her bones. She could feel the weight of the curse pulling at her, trying to drag her back into the heart of this nightmare. Michael, Rachel gasped, her voice desperate as the dark tendrils reached out, curling around her ankles, pulling her feet from under her. We have to fight it. We have to. Michael gripped her tightly, his face pale with terror, but his eyes burning with determination. We can't give up now, he shouted, his voice hoarse with fear. We can't let it take you again. He yanked her forward, trying to pull her toward the door, but the shadows seemed to fight back, tightening their hold around her. Every step they took was met with resistance, like trying to walk through thick, sticky mud. The room began to thin, and Rachel's vision blurred as she felt the curse tightening its grip on her. The woman, the bride who had been the vessel of the curse, appeared again, her form rising from the shadows like a ghostly figure. Her face was twisted in sorrow, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light, and her mouth twisted into a smile that was as cold as death. You can never leave, the woman's voice echoed, louder this time, as if it were coming from every corner of the room. The curse lives in this place, in the bloodline, in you. It will never let you go. Your wedding day will be your last. Your fate is sealed. Rachel struggled against the dark tendrils that wrapped around her, but they only grew tighter, grew tighter, her toward the center of the ballroom, toward the spot where the curse had first taken root. Michael tried to pull her back, but the shadows were relentless, stronger than anything they had faced so far. No, Rachel screamed, panic rising in her chest. Please, not again. I won't let this happen. Her hands trembled as she reached for the pendant around her neck. It was still glowing, faintly, but now it felt different. It pulsed with a strange energy, as if it were alive, as if it were reacting to the growing darkness around her. Moment, Rachel realized something. The pendant wasn't just a part of the curse, it was also the key to ending it. The power it held was ancient, yes, but it was also bound to her bloodline. It was hers to command, hers to control. With a sudden surge of determination, Rachel gripped the pendant tightly, feeling its warmth spread through her fingertips. "No, I won't let you win," she whispered to herself, her voice steady with resolve. "You're not going to take me, not again." The shadows recoiled as the pendant's glow brightened, radiating with an intensity that pushed back the darkness. The woman's form flickered, her eyes narrowing in fury as the light intensified. "You're too weak to fight me," the woman hissed. "You can never be rid of the curse." Rachel's heart pounded in her chest, but she knew what she had to do. The pendant was hers. The power was hers. She could end this. With one final, forceful motion, she held the pendant high above her head, the light blinding. The shadows shrieked in agony, their forms unraveling as the light pierced through them. The ballroom shook, the walls trembling with the energy that erupted from the pendant. The woman's face twisted in pain, her mouth open in a silent scream as the curse began to unravel. The shadows dissipated, vanishing into the air like smoke, leaving only the faintest trace of their presence. The temperature in the room began to rise again, the oppressive chill lifting. The room, once filled with dark energy, was now bathed in light. The curse banished for now. Rachel collapsed into Michael's arms, her body shaking with exhaustion. She had done it. She had broken the curse. "Rachel, Michael," whispered, holding her tightly. "Are you okay?" Rachel nodded, tears streaming down her face as she clung to him. I think so. I think it's over." But it felt like it was never ending, like it would come back again. Michael kissed the top of her head, his hands gently brushing the tears from her face. "We'll fight it together, Rachel, no matter what." Rachel closed her eyes, her heart still racing, but a sense of peace beginning to settle within her. She wasn't alone. They would face whatever came next, together. But even as the curse had been pushed back, a small part of Rachel's mind couldn't help but wonder, would it ever truly be over? Or would the shadows always be waiting, lurking just beyond the light, despite the light now filling the room? Despite the shadows retreating into nothingness, a lingering unease settled over Rachel. The warmth of the pendant still pulsed in her hand, but it felt heavier now, as though it carried more than just the weight of its history. It felt like a warning, a reminder that the curse was not truly gone. It had merely retreated, waiting, watching, biding its time. Michael held her close, sensing her unease. "It's over, Rachel," he whispered again. "It's over, Rachel," he whispered again, more gently this time. "We did it. The curse is gone." But Rachel could not shake the feeling that something was still wrong. Her mind raced as she thought of everything that had happened, the figure in the ballroom, the whispers, the woman in the shadows, and the chilling words that had echoed in her mind. "You can never escape. I don't know," Rachel muttered, her voice filled with doubt. "I don't feel free. It doesn't feel over. It's like it's still here, in the air. It's like it's still here, in me." Michael stepped back slightly, his eyes full of concern. "What do you mean? You're safe." "We're safe now." Rachel shook her head slowly, her grip tightening on the pendant. The pendant, it's still reacting. It's like it's still connected to the curse. A silence fell between them, thick and heavy, as they both looked down at the pendant. The soft, almost imperceptible glow that had filled the room faded, but a faint warmth still radiated from the piece of jewelry, pulsing steadily like the beat of a heart. "We need to leave," Rachel said suddenly, the urgency in her voice rising. This place is cursed. The longer we stay here, the more likely it is that the curse will regain its strength. It's not finished with us. It's not finished with us. It's not finished with me. Michael looked around the room, still half in disbelief, but then he nodded. I agree. We've got to go? But where do we even go, Rachel? What if it follows us? Rachel didn't know how to answer him. All she knew was that they couldn't stay. The ballroom, the place where they had once imagined their future together, now felt like a tomb. The cursed walls seemed to echo with the whispers of a past long now forgotten, but never truly gone. We have to find a way to break it completely, Rachel said, her voice growing steady with resolve. We need to find out everything we can about the curse, how to stop it, once and for all. Michael met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw a hint of the fear she had been feeling mirrored in his eyes. But there was something else there too, determination. We will, he said, his voice low but firm. Together, with that, they turned and made their way toward the exit, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the vast, empty ballroom. As they crossed the threshold, Rachel looked back one last time, and for a brief moment, she could have sworn she saw the shadow of the woman, the bride, lingering in the far corner of the room, watching them, waiting for them to leave. But when she blinked, it was gone. Outside, the night was calm, the air cool and crisp as Rachel and Michael stepped into the quiet streets. It was as if the world had forgotten the horrors they had just endured, as though everything was normal again. But Rachel could still feel the weight of the pendant against her chest, heavy and constant, like a reminder that the curse was never truly gone. They stayed freely key. What your so eager story and right to revenge were at, the way in mind witnessed, like Kane and reminder that the curse was never truly good. Walked in silence, Rachel lost in thought, trying to piece together what she had learned. She had to know more. She had to understand the curse, the history behind it. She knew there was more to the pendant than she had been told. She needed to tell whatever need. That is, what to answers. Where do we go from here? Michael asked after a long pause, his voice almost hesitant. Rachel turned to him, her expression serious. We go to the library, she said. We start with my grandmother's journals. If anyone knew how to break the curse, it was her. Michael nodded, understanding immediately. Let's do it. The two of them walked in the direction of the town's old library, an imposing stone building that stood at the edge of the town square. Untouched by time, it was a place of quiet solitude, where secrets were buried within dust-covered shelves and forgotten tomes. Rachel hoped that within its ancient walls there would be answers. As they approached the library, Rachel felt a growing unease. The air around them seemed to thicken once more, the oppressive weight of the curse returning. But this time, it was different. It wasn't the shadows of the ballroom. They were no longer in that place. No, this felt like something else entirely. A whisper from something else entirely. Darkness, a soft call. Rachel, Michael said suddenly, his voice filled with alarm. Do you feel that? Rachel stopped in her tracks, her heart skipping a beat. I feel it, she whispered. It's here. Before them, the library doors creaked open on their own. Despite the lack of wind, the sound was like a warning, a signal that the curse had followed them here. The darkness of the building seemed to stretch outward, inviting them in. With a deep breath, Rachel stepped forward, gripping Michael's hand tightly. We're not running anymore, she said firmly. We're going to end this. The doors of the library swung open with a creak, and an unnatural chill brushed against Rachel's skin. The faintest sound of whispering seemed to drift through the air, as if the very walls of the building were alive, hiding secrets in him. The shadows. It was as though the library had been waiting for them to step into the darkness it had been harboring for years. Rachel's heart raced as she stepped inside, Michael close behind her. The library was vast, its high, vaulted ceiling was covered with dust, and the faint smell of old paper and wood lingered in the air. The shelves were filled with ancient books, their leather bindings cracked and worn with age. But there was something else in the air, a sense of foreboding that Rachel couldn't ignore. It was as if the library itself was watching them, waiting to reveal something dark, something hidden. "We need to find my grandmother's journals," Rachel whispered, her voice trembling slightly. She must have written down everything. She had to know how to stop the curse. Michael nodded, his hand resting on her shoulder for reassurance. "We'll find them. Don't worry." They began to walk down the aisles of the library. Their footsteps echoing through the empty space. The soft light from the single lamp above illuminated only part of the room, leaving the rest of it submerged in shadow. The whispers from the darkness grew louder, swirling around them like a distant chant. Rachel tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the rows of books. She scanned the titles, her heart pounding faster with each passing moment. Then, as they reached the back of the library, Rachel stopped. Her eyes were drawn toward a particular section of shelves, the ones that seemed older, untouched by time. There, tucked between the dark wooden shelves, was a small, unmarked book. Rachel reached for it, her fingers trembling as she pulled it from its resting place. The book was smaller than the others, its pages yellowed with age. As Rachel opened it, she felt a sharp, cold breath brush the back of her neck. Her pulse quickened, and for a moment she hesitated, looking around the library. The whispers were now louder, almost as if they were right next to her. But when she turned to look, there was nothing there. "Rachel?" Michael's voice broke through her thoughts, and she turned to him, startled. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide with concern. "Do you feel that?" "The air. It's getting colder," Rachel nodded, her grip tightening around the book. "We're close. I can feel it. It's in here. Whatever it is." With a deep breath, she began to read aloud from the pages of the journal, her voice trembling as the words seemed to pull at her soul. The curse was passed down through generations, a binding born of betrayal and blood, the pendant. It is both a gift and a prison. Each woman in our family wears it, but none know family wears it, but none know the cost. The curse seeks to claim us, but there is a way to break it, a way to sever the ties and set the soul free. The pendant must be destroyed, but it is not as simple as it seems. The key to breaking the curse is bound within the blood. One must make a sacrifice to truly be free. Rachel's throat tightened as she read the final lines. "A sacrifice?" she murmured, her mind racing. "What does that mean?" "What kind of sacrifice?" Suddenly the temperature in the room dropped even further. The whispers, once faint, now filled the entire library, growing louder and more frantic. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch and shift, taking on the shape of fiery oral grey kind alternative to T-sword and spinal winterars, and in fact that came on the shape of twisted, monstrous figures. "No," Rachel whispered, her breath catching in her throat. "It's coming." From the darkness, the figure appeared again. This time, it was clearer, more defined. The woman, the bride, face twisted in agony. Her eyes were hollow, her skin pale as death, and the very air around her seemed to warp and shimmer. "You cannot escape me," the woman hissed, her voice an echo of sorrow and rage. "You thought you could break the curse, but it lives in you, Rachel. You cannot outrun your fate." Rachel's heart hammered in her chest as the woman moved closer, her form flickering like a candle flame in the wind. "You cannot destroy what is already yours," the woman continued. "The curse will always return, because it is you. You are the key, the vessel, The bloodline cannot be broken. No, Rachel shouted, her voice filled with defiance. She gripped the pendant, its warmth now burning through her fingers. I won't be your vessel. I won't let you take me. But the woman smiled, a cruel, twisted smile that sent chills down Rachel's spine. You will. Her voice grew louder, more powerful. You must. The shadows in the room began to grow, swirling around Rachel and Michael. The very walls seemed to pulse with energy, as though the library itself was alive, feeding off the curse. The whispers became louder, maddening, filling Rachel's mind with confusion and fear. Michael, we have to act, Rachel cried, her voice shaky. We can't stay here. The curse is trying to take us both. Michael grabbed her by the shoulders, shaking her gently. We're not giving up, Rachel. We can't let it win. Whatever it takes, we're getting out of here. But as he spoke, the temperature dropped even further, and the shadows began to form, coiling around them like serpents, tightening their grip. The woman's figure grew stronger, and with a flick of her hand, a gust of cold wind blew through the library, extinguishing the lamp above them. The darkness grew thick, consuming everything, and Rachel felt the coldness seep into her very bones. The whispers were deafening now, and she realized with horror that they were not just whispers, they were voices, ancient and full of pain. Their voices all calling to her. Rachel, no. Michael's voice cut through the noise, his grip tightening on her arm as he tried to pull her away. But the shadows were relentless, pulling them both into the heart of the darkness, threatening to drag them under. Rachel closed her eyes, her eyes, hers, mind racing for a way out. But she knew deep down there was only one way to break the curse. The woman had been right. The curse was her, and the sacrifice, the one thing she had to give up, was her very own freedom. With a deep, shuddering own freedom, with a deep, shuddering own out breath, Rachel whispered to Michael, I have to do this. I have to end it. The darkness pressed in on Rachel like a physical force, suffocating and heavy, as the cursed woman's presence grew stronger. Michael's grip tightened on her arm. His grip tightened on her arm, his eyes wide with panic. But Rachel could feel the pull of something greater, something more powerful than anything they had faced before. Rachel, please don't do this, Michael cried out, his voice filled with desperation. We can fight this together. We can figure out another way. But Rachel could already feel the curse wrapping itself around her heart, twisting and tightening, demanding a sacrifice. The pendant pulsed in her hand, almost alive, as if it were calling to her, urging her to fulfill the bloodline's cruel fate. No, Michael, Rachel whispered, her voice strained but resolute. This is the only way. It's always been the only way. The shadows shifted around them, dark tendrils reaching out like claws, pulling at the edges of Rachel's mind. She could hear the whispers more clearly now, their words a chaotic, maddening chorus. Sacrifice. Sacrifice. It is the only way. Rachel knew that the curse had been binding her family for generations. It had claimed her grandmother. It had claimed the woman in the ballroom, and now it was coming for her. The pendant had been a key, a gateway to this curse, and she had only now understood its true purpose. It wasn't just an heirloom. It was a chain, anchoring her to the past, to the darkness that had followed her bloodline. She closed her eyes, taking a deep, steadying breath. She could feel Michael's panic rising beside her, could hear him whispering her name, but it all felt so distant, as if as if she were standing on the edge of a precipice, looking into a void she could no longer escape. This fate, she whispered softly, more to herself. Stop it. Michael tried to pull her away, but his hand slipped from her arms as the shadows seemed to thicken, pushing them further apart. I'm not letting you do this. We can break the curse. We'll find another way, Rachel. But his voice was drowned out by the growing noise, the whispers, the laughter of the cursed woman, the twisted, distorted sound of everything unraveling. Rachel looked back at Michael, her heart breaking at the pain in his eyes. But she knew in that moment that there was no other choice. The pendant in her hand blazed with a cold light, its glow intensifying. It was calling to her, summoning her to complete the curse. She felt her body tremble, her soul fighting against the pull, but deep down, she knew that the curse could never truly be undone without this final act. I love you, Michael, Rachel whispered, her voice breaking, tears welling in her eyes. But I have to end it, as the final words escaped her lips. Pendant flared with light. The shadows around her screamed in fury, their form writhing, as if the darkness itself was resisting her decision. But Rachel held her ground, her hand clenched tightly around the pendant, feeling its power surge through her. And then the woman's figure stepped forward, her twisted smile stretching wider, her eyes burning with malevolent energy. You think you can break the curse? The woman hissed. You think you can escape what has been written for you? But Rachel didn't answer. She could feel the energy in the room, rising ancient, powerful, unyielding. The shadows pressed in on her, but she knew the truth now. The curse had been part of her family for so long because it had always demanded this sacrifice. The pendant had always been the key, the price her bloodline had paid to keep the darkness contained. With one last breath, Rachel closed her eyes and let the light consume her. The curse fought back, but it was too late. Pendant shattered, its glow blinding as the darkness began to recede. Rachel's heart raced as she felt the last of the curse drain away from her, leaving only silence in its wake. She opened her eyes, her body trembling, but the woman, the bride, was gone. The shadows had vanished, and the room was now bathed in a soft, golden light. Rachel fell to her knees, gasping for breath, the weight of the curse finally lifting from her shoulders. Michael rushed to her side, his face pale but filled with relief. Rachel, he whispered, tears in his eyes. You did it. You broke it. But Rachel could hardly speak. Her body was exhausted, drained from the immense struggle, and yet she knew the truth. The curse had been severed, but it had come at a great cost. Her family's bloodline would no longer carry its burden, but neither would she ever be the same. Is it really over? She whispered weakly, her voice barely audible. Michael nodded, gently brushing her hair back. Yes, Rachel, it's over. We're free. For a moment, the two of them simply sat there in the stillness of the library, surrounded by the silence that followed. The air felt different now, lighter, as if the curse had truly been lifted. But even as Rachel rested in Michael's arms, a flicker of unease remained. She had broken the curse, but at what cost? The pendant had been destroyed, the darkness pushed back, but Rachel knew the scars would remain forever, her bloodline forever intertwined with the curse it had carried for centuries. As Rachel and Michael made their way out of the library, the cool night air wrapped around them, the weight of the past finally seeming to lift. But Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that something still lingered, deep within her. It wasn't just the memories of the curse, it was the realization that there was no escaping the darkness, not entirely. It would always be part of her. And yet, as Rachel looked at Michael, the warmth of his hand in hers, she realized something. The curse had tried to break them. It had tried to tear their love apart. But in the end, it had failed. They had fought together, and they had won. The battle was over, but the journey, that, she knew, was just beginning. As Rachel and Michael stepped out of the library, the cool night air wrapped around them, and the faint glow of the street lamps lit the path ahead. The world outside seemed normal, quiet, peaceful, and untouched by the horrors they had just faced. But Rachel couldn't shake the unease that gnawed at her insides. She had broken the curse, yes, but the price had been steep. The shadow of the past still lingered in her heart, and she felt the fear of the past still lingered in her heart, and she felt the weight of it with every step. They walked in silence for a long time, the only sound their footsteps echoing through the empty streets. Rachel kept her hand tightly clasped around Michael's, as though afraid that if she let go, the darkness might return. "Where do we go from here?" Michael asked quietly, his voice filled with concern. "We're free, but it doesn't feel like it. It feels like something is still hanging over us." Rachel glanced up at him, her heart aching as she saw the uncertainty in his eyes. She had hoped that breaking the curse would bring closure, but the truth was more complicated than that. The curse had been part of her family's bloodline for generations. It had shaped who they were, who she was. And now that it was gone, she wasn't sure who she was anymore. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice shaky. "I thought breaking the curse would make everything better, but it's like something's missing. I feel like I'm walking in the shadow of something I can't escape." Michael stopped walking and turned to face her. "You are not alone in this," he said firmly, his eyes locked on hers. "We're in this together. We face the worst of it. We'll face whatever comes next, together." Rachel nodded, feeling a sense of comfort in his words, but the weight in her chest didn't lighten. The darkness had been banished, but it had left scars, deep ones, that Rachel wasn't sure would ever fade. The truth was, the curse was never just about the pendant, the shadows, or the woman. It was about the history of her family, the pain they had carried for centuries, and the things they had lost. And now, as the world around them began to feel more real, more tangible, Rachel realized that she didn't just need to move on from the curse. She needed to reclaim who she was, to find a way to rebuild her life after everything she had lost. Suddenly, a soft, eerie laugh broke through the silence, sending a chill through Rachel's spine. Froze, her heart skipping a beat. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Michael's eyes darted around the dark street, his expression tense. The laugh echoed again, soft but chilling, like a whisper carried by the wind. It wasn't just a laugh, it was a sound full of sorrow and rage, as if the darkness itself was calling out to her. Rachel's breath hitched in her throat. "It's back," she whispered, her eyes wide with panic. Michael grabbed her by the shoulders, his face filled with fear. "No, Rachel, it's over. The curse is over. We're free." But Rachel could feel it, the faint tug of something still lingering. The darkness had been banished from the ballroom, but something had followed them, something that wouldn't let go. She turned to face him, her eyes filled with determination. "It's not over," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her. "It's never truly over." The laugh came again, louder this time, echoing from the shadows ahead. Rachel stepped forward, her heart pounding as she faced the unknown. She knew deep down that the curse had not been completely broken. It was still following them, like a shadow that refused to fade. "We have to face this," Rachel said, her voice firm. "We have to stop it for good." Michael looked at her, his face a mixture of fear and determination. "How do we stop it if it's still following us?" Rachel didn't have an answer, but she felt the truth settle in her bones. The curse wasn't just something that could be defeated once and for all. It was part of her bloodline. It would always return. But maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to live with it, control it, and keep it at bay, together, Rachel said, her voice filled with resolve. "We have to keep fighting. With that, They continued down the path, their footsteps echoing in the darkness. Their footsteps echoing in the darkness. Distant laugh faded, but Rachel knew it wasn't gone. She knew the curse had found a new way to haunt her, to pull her back into its grip, but this time, she wouldn't run. She wouldn't let it consume her. She and Michael would fight back. They would face whatever came next, whatever darkness lurked just beyond their reach. They would break the cycle, and they would find peace. The night air seemed to close in on them as they walked, the street lights casting long, distorted shadows that stretched far beyond their reach. Rachel could feel it, something watching them from the darkness, something that refused to let go. The laugh, though distant, still echoed in her mind, gnawing at her resolve. She had hoped that the curse, once broken, would finally release its grip on her. But now, she knew better. It wasn't just a curse. It was a part of her, embedded deep within her family's history. And even though they had faced it, even though they had pushed it back, the darkness still lingered, waiting for its next move. Michael walked beside her, his grip tight on her hand. He was quiet, but she could feel his unease, his confusion about what had just happened. But Rachel knew the truth now. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for their future, and it wasn't over. They turned the corner, heading toward the edge of town where Rachel's grandmother's house sat at the edge of a small forest. It had been abandoned forest, years, but Rachel knew that the answers they sought were hidden there. The journals her grandmother had written, the stories she had passed down there, had to be something in those pages that could explain how to put an end to the curse for good. "We're almost there," Rachel said, her voice low, steady. She had to remain strong for both of them. "I know this is hard to understand, Michael, but I think the answers are here. My grandmother knew more about the curse than anyone else." Michael didn't reply immediately. Instead, he squeezed her hand, his eyes filled with both concern and determination. "You're right," he said finally. "We'll find a way. We've made it this far." Rachel nodded, but the truth lingered in her mind. They couldn't just fight the curse. They had to break it completely, and for that, she would need to understand what her grandmother had done to try to protect her family. How had she resisted the curse all those years? What had been left behind? The house loomed in front of them, its windows dark, its structure barely visible in the dim light. The wooden door creaked as they pushed it open, the air inside thick with the smell of dust and age. Rachel stepped inside, the old floorboards and age. Rachel stepped inside the old floorboards, groaning beneath her feet. She could almost feel the presence of her grandmother here, as though her spirit still lingered, watching over her. "Stay close," Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible as she moved deeper into the house. Barely audible as she moved deeper into the house. The walls were covered in old photographs, yellowing with age, depicting family members long gone. Her grandmother's smile, frozen in time, stared back at her from the frames, as if urging her to remember something. They made their way into the living room, where an old bookshelf stood, laden with dusty books. Rachel ran her fingers over the spines, her heart pounding as she scanned the titles. Then her eyes fell on a small, leather-bound journal tucked into the corner of the shelf. "That's it," she said softly, her fingers trembling as she reached for it. She opened the journal to the first page, the familiar handwriting of her grandmother greeting her with a simple message. "For Rachel, when the time comes. You, Rachel, when the time comes. You must know the truth." Rachel took a deep breath and began reading aloud, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "The curse has been passed down through the bloodline of our family for centuries. It was born of betrayal, a pact made long ago, and it is tied to the pendant you wear. The pendant holds the key to breaking the curse. But it is not a simple matter. The curse is bound to the one who bears the pendant. The bloodline must make a sacrifice, one that will sever the link between the curse and the soul. The price is great, but it is the only way to break free. Rachel paused, her heart pounding. She had read those words before, but this time they took on a new weight. The sacrifice. The price. Grandmother had known all along. Rachel had thought that destroying the pendant would end the curse, but it wasn't that simple. The curse had been tied to her bloodline, her very soul. What does it mean, Grandma? Rachel whispered to herself, clutching the journal tighter. What is the sacrifice? The room seemed to grow colder, the shadows pressing in on her. Michael stood beside her, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. Rachel, he said softly, we'll figure it out. Whatever the sacrifice is, we'll face it together. But Rachel, face it together. But Rachel knew, deep down, that the sacrifice wasn't something that could be shared. It was something only she could do. The journal continued. The only way to truly end the curse is to sever the connection. But the cost is a soul. The soul of the one. The soul of the one who bears the pendant. And once the bond is broken, the darkness will consume them. This is the price of freedom. If you choose to end it, you must be willing to let go of everything. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. Let go of everything? The curse had always been about the pendant, the bloodline, the sacrifice. But now, reading her grandmother's words, Rachel realized that the cost wasn't just her family, it was herself. She looked at Michael, who had been silent, watching her with an intensity that made her heart ache. It's me, isn't it? She whispered. The sacrifice. It's me. Michael's eyes widened, his face filled with shock. No, Rachel. No, we'll find another way. There has to be another way. But Rachel shook her head slowly, her mind racing. The curse. It's been passed down through generations. It has always claimed one person in the bloodline. And now it's me. I have to break it. Tears welled up in her eyes as she clutched the journal to her chest. She didn't want to believe it, but deep down, she knew what she had to do. Michael stepped forward, his face filled with grief. Rachel, please, I don't want to lose you. We've already been through so much. Don't give up on us, please. Rachel took his hand in hers, her fingers trembling. I can't run from this. Michael, it's always been part of me, but I won't let the curse win. I won't let it take anyone else. She stood up, her mind made up. I love you, she whispered to him, and I always will, but this is the only way. The room felt colder now. The weight of Rachel's words hanging between them like an invisible force. Michael stood still, unable to process the depth of what Rachel had just said. His eyes were filled with disbelief, his lips trembling as he tried to form a response. But nothing came. How could he accept it? How could he lose her? After everything they had been through. I don't want to lose you, Rachel, Michael finally managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. There has to be another way. We can find it together. We faced worse than this. Rachel looked at him, her heart aching with the pain of the truth. The truth she had come to realize deep inside her, but couldn't bring herself to say until now. There's no other way, Michael, she whispered. I know what I have to do. The curse. It's been in my family for generations. It won't let go. Not without this. Michael reached for her, his hands trembling as he held her close. Please, he begged softly. Please don't do this. We can't let it win. I can't let it take you, Rachel replied, her voice steady despite the overwhelming sadness in her heart. I can't let it take anyone else. The curse, it's always been a part of me, and now it has to end. She looked down at the journal, her fingers trembling as she turned to the last page. The sacrifice. The sacrifice had been foretold, but the price was higher than anything she could have ever imagined. There was no escaping it, no running from it. Rachel closed her eyes, feeling the pendant against her chest, its warmth still flickering faintly. The light it had once emitted was gone, leaving only the faintest trace of its power. But in this moment, Rachel understood. The pendant had never been her protector. It had been the anchor to the curse. And now it was time to break that bond for good. "I have to do this, Michael," she whispered, her voice barely audible as she pulled away from him. "I have to end it. I can't let this curse live on anymore." Michael's face twisted with grief, his heart aching as he watched her. "I loves her. I love you, Rachel. I love you so much, but I won't let you go. Not like this." Rachel took a deep breath, her hands shaking. "You have to let me go, for both of us. We can't outrun this forever." The air in the house seemed to grow heavier, and the house seemed to grow heavier, and suddenly, Rachel felt the pull again, the tug of the curse. The dark presence trying to claim her. She could feel it wrapping around her, testing her resolve. "Rachel," Michael whispered. He stepped closer, his voice strained with emotion. "You don't have to sacrifice yourself. There's still time. We can figure this out. There must be another way." But Rachel could see the truth in his eyes. He didn't believe it anymore. She had known, deep down, that this moment would come. She had to let go. She had to be the one to stop the curse, no matter what it took. With one last glance at Michael, her heart breaking as she saw the pain in his eyes, Rachel stepped forward, her hand still clutching the journal tightly. She approached the center of the room, where the darkness had once been, where the curse had taken root in her mind. She could see the path ahead, the sacrifice, the final step that would sever the curse once and for all. Michael's "and for all" voice called out to her, but it was distant now. His words blurred into the background as Rachel focused on the task at hand. She raised the pendant in her hand, feeling its pulse growing stronger. The shadows in the room shifted, flickering with the energy that seemed to build inside her. It was as though the curse was aware of her decision, and it fought to claim her once more. But Rachel was ready. She had no fear left, not anymore. With one final steady breath, she closed her eyes and held the pendant high above her head, the light of the pendant flaring again, more intense than before. The shadows in the room screeched, a horrifying sound of anguish and rage, as if they were being torn apart. And in that moment, Rachel made the choice. "Let it end," she whispered, her voice firm as the pendant's light blinded her. "Let it end with me." The light from the pendant surged, filling the room with blinding brightness. The air crackled with raw energy, the power of the curse battling against the light. The darkness howled, but it couldn't fight what was happening. The curse that had gripped her bloodline for so long was finally being broken. The bond was severed, and then, with 8 final, deafening crack, the light consumed everything. For a brief moment, Rachel felt nothing, no pain, no fear, just silence. The next moment, Rachel opened her eyes. The darkness was gone. The room was still. She was alone. She looked alone, around, her heart pounding in her chest. The curse, it was gone. She had done it. The bloodline was free. But then, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered, "Was it really over?" Rachel felt her breath catch in her throat, her heart racing again as she stood there, waiting for something, anything. But the room remained silent, calm, as though the curse had never existed at all then. She heard a faint rustle behind her. Rachel turned slowly. her heart still racing in her chest. The room around her felt both unfamiliar and strangely peaceful. The oppressive presence that had haunted her for so long was gone, but there was something else, something lingering, just beyond her reach. The rustling sound came again, soft and almost imperceptible, like the fluttering of paper. Rachel's breath caught in her throat as she slowly turned toward the source of the sound. There, in the corner of the room, was a figure. At first, Rachel thought it was Michael, but as her eyes focused, she realized it wasn't him. The figure was tall, slender, draped in dark, flowing robes that seemed to blend into the shadows. Its face was hidden in darkness, but there was an unmistakable presence about it, one that sent a chill down her spine. Rachel's heart thudded louder in her chest as the figure stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate. "Who are you?" Rachel demanded, her voice shaky, but she stood her ground. She was tired of fear, tired of the curse. She had broken it. She had made the ultimate sacrifice, and she wouldn't be intimidated again. The figure tilted its head, as if studying its head. As if studying her. "You think the curse is broken," it said, its voice deep and resonant, carrying a tone of ancient wisdom. "You think the bond has been severed." Rachel felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. This wasn't just another shadow of the curse. This was something else, something older, something deeper. "I know it's over," Rachel said, trying to steady her voice. "I've broken the curse. It's gone. It can't hurt anyone else." The figure stepped closer, its movements fluid and unnerving, like it was one with the shadows. "The curse is but a fragment of something much older, much more powerful than you realize. What you have broken is a mere illusion, a small thread in a much larger web." Rachel's stomach tightened as the weight of those words settled in. "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" The figure let out a low, almost amused chuckle. "You cannot destroy what is eternal, Rachel. The curse, your bloodline's burden, is only a symptom of something far darker, far more ancient. It is not over. It has never truly been over." Rachel felt the ground beneath her feet shift, the room seeming to tilt as the figure's words echoed in her mind. The pendant that had been her anchor, her bond to the curse, now lay broken at her feet. But what had she truly destroyed? Was this sacrifice enough? What do you want?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The figure stepped into the light, revealing its face pale, almost skeletal, with glowing eyes that held an unsettling knowledge. It was neither malevolent nor kind. It was simply ancient, indifferent to her fear. "I am the keeper," the figure said, its voice reverberating through the room. "I am the one who watches over the curse, the one who sees beyond time, beyond the limitations of your world." Rachel's breath quickened. The keeper? "Yes," the figure continued, its eyes narrowing as it regarded her. "The curse was never a mistake. It was always meant to be. A test, a reminder you cannot break what was never meant to be broken." Rachel shook her head, trying to make sense of the cryptic words. "No, I ended it. The bloodline is free." The keeper tilted its head, its expression unreadable. "Freedom?" it mused. "What you have destroyed is the connection, the thread that bound you to the curse. But you have not destroyed the foundation that it was built upon. And now it must begin again." Rachel's heart plummeted. "What foundation?" The keeper stepped closer, its voice low and almost sorrowful. "The curse was never just about the pendant. It was about your bloodline, your family. A pact made long ago, a promise that cannot be undone. Your sacrifice, though necessary, has shifted the balance. You may have destroyed one piece, but you cannot erase the bond. A cold shiver ran down Rachel's spine. So, what now? She asked, her voice trembling with the weight of the truth she was beginning to understand. The keeper's gaze softened, just slightly. The darkness is not finished with you. It will always follow you, Rachel. But now, it is a different kind of darkness, one that has been waiting for this moment. Rachel felt her knees weaken, and she sank to the floor, clutching her chest. She had fought so hard. She had broken the curse. She had sacrificed everything. And yet it felt like it was never truly over. You are free, but the darkness will always find its way back, the keeper said, its voice distant and hollow. And when it does, you will have a choice. Rachel looked up, her eyes filled with confusion and fear. A choice? The keeper nodded slowly. A choice to embrace the darkness, to wield it as your own, or to let it consume you, just as it has consumed so many before you. The room seemed to pulse with the weight of its words. The choice was clear, but Rachel knew deep down that it was never truly a choice at all. The curse, the darkness, it was tied to her now. It was part of her soul, and no matter how far she ran, it would follow her. The keeper's figure began to fade into the shadows, its form dissolving into the very air around them. This is not the end, Rachel. It is simply the beginning. You will have to face it again. And when you do, remember, the choice will be yours. With those final words, the keeper vanished, leaving Rachel and Michael standing alone in the room, surrounded by the eerie silence of what remained. Rachel stood in the center of the room, her body trembling as the weight of the keeper's words settled deep in her chest. The silence that deep in her chest followed his departure was almost suffocating. Michael stood beside her, his face pale with fear and confusion, his hand still clutched tightly in hers. "Rachel, what just happened?" he asked, his voice shaky. "What was that thing? And what did it mean?" The darkness will always find its way back. Rachel's mind spun, trying to piece together everything she had just learned. The keeper, the curse, the bloodline. It was all too much to process in a single moment. She was all too much to process in a single moment. Had broken the curse, yes, but it wasn't just about the pendant or the shadows. It was about the darkness that had always been a part of her. The sacrifice had only been a momentary fix, not a permanent solution. And now it seemed that the darkness was waiting for her, waiting for the next move. "I don't know," Rachel whispered, her voice cracking. "I thought it was over. I thought the curse was finally gone, but it's not gone. Michael, it's still here. And it will always still be here following me." Michael stepped closer, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "We'll figure this out together. We've been through so much already. We can't let this thing tear us apart." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. She looked up at him. "I don't know if I can keep doing this, Michael. The curse has always been a part of me. I've lived with it, and I've fought it. But now I don't know how to fight it anymore. The keeper," he said, "I have a choice. Embrace the darkness, or to let it consume me." Michael's expression hardened with determination. "We don't have to embrace it, Rachel. You don't have to be what it wants you to be. We'll find a way to end it once and for all. We'll face whatever comes next." But Rachel could feel it in the air. Something was shifting. The room, the house, even the air around them felt different now. The shadows were no longer just fleeting moments of fear. They felt like something tangible, waiting, watching, like they were alive, breathing. "It's in me now," Rachel whispered, her voice filled with a strange sadness. "The curse is in my blood. I can feel it. I can feel it. I can feel it. I can feel it growing stronger every time I try to fight it. Michael's face softened, and he pulled her into a tight embrace, his voice firm but filled with warmth. You're not alone in this, Rachel. You don't have to fight this on your own. Rachel pulled back slightly, her eyes meeting his. But what if this is something I have to face by myself? What if the only way to truly end it is to let it consume me? No, Michael said, shaking his head. I refuse to believe that. I won't let you sacrifice yourself. Not again. We'll face it together. We always have, and we always will. Rachel looked into his eyes, feeling the depth of his love for her. He had been there through every moment of this nightmare, and she knew he would stand by her, no matter what came next. But even in his arms, she felt the weight of the curse pressing down on her, the shadows swirling, always just beyond her reach. Suddenly, the pendant, still lying on the floor where it had fallen when she shattered it, began to glow faintly. It was small, a subtle light at first, but as Rachel stared at it, the glow grew stronger, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed almost alive. Michael, she gasped, her voice shaking. It's not gone. It's still here. The pendant, it's still calling to me. The air around them grew colder, the whispers from the shadows growing louder again. More frantic, Rachel's heart began to race as she realized the truth. The darkness hadn't been banished. It had only been sleeping, waiting for the right moment to return. And now it was awake. It was pulling at her, urging her to finish what had been started. Michael looked down at the pendant, his expression filled with fear. What do we do now, Rachel? How do we stop it? Rachel knelt down, reaching for the pendant. As her fingers brushed against it, the light flickered, and the room seemed to tremble, like a storm was brewing just beneath the surface. I think I know what I have to do, Rachel said softly. I think I know what I have to do, Rachel said softly, her voice trembling but filled with a quiet determination. I have to face it. I have to face the darkness inside of me and destroy it once and for all. Michael shook his head, but Rachel placed a gentle hand on his arm. It's even online. You see only Mr. Nowhere. Or Mr. the boring old guy better lady old Christ. Been on this all. Wait, Michael. I can't keep running from this. I have to destroy the curse. From the inside. Tears welled in Rachel's eyes as she stood up, her resolve hardening. She had always fought to escape the darkness, but now she understood. It wasn't something she could outrun. It was a part of her family's history. The only way to truly break the cycle was to face it head on and destroy it once and for all. Michael stepped forward, his face filled with fear and resolve. We'll face it together, Rachel. No matter what. We'll get through this. But Rachel knew, deep down, that the final battle wasn't one she could share. She had to do it alone. The darkness had always been hers to carry, and now it can't healing. And if you're hers to carry, and now it was time to face it. With one last glance at Michael, Rachel turned away and walked to the center of the room. The shadows seemed to swirl around her, pressing in on her, but she stood tall, holding the pendant high above her head. End this, she whispered, her voice steady. End the curse. End the darkness. The pendant flared with an intense, blinding light. The shadows recoiled, the whispers growing louder as the darkness fought back. But Rachel's heart burned with the strength of her resolve. She would not let it win. Not anymore. With a final cry, she drove the pendant into the ground, the light exploding outward, filling the room with a blinding brilliance. The light from the pendant blazed brighter than ever before, so intense it seemed to fill the entire room, drowning out the shadows and the whispers that had once surrounded her. The room pulsed with energy, like the very fabric of reality was being torn apart by the force of the explosion of light. Rachel closed her eyes, feeling the power radiating through her, her body shaking with the intensity of the moment. The ground beneath her feet trembled as the darkness screamed in rage. A horrifying, guttural sound that seemed to vibrate her very bones. She felt the pull of it, the weight of centuries of suffering, pain, and betrayal. But she stood firm, the pendant embedded in the ground, glowing with an intensity that would not be denied. This ends now. The light grew brighter, searing, until Rachel could no longer see. She could feel the energy, the curse unraveling around her, as if the darkness were being sucked into the very heart of the pendant. The shrieks and the whispers faded, swallowed by fear, brilliance, and then silence. Rachel opened her eyes, the light around her fading to a soft, warm glow. She blinked, disoriented, and found herself standing in the center of the room, the pendant lying shattered at her feet. The air was wassered at her feet, still, calm, as if nothing had happened, as if the storm had passed. The shadows were gone. The whispers had stopped. Gripped her body for so long finally began to ease. The curse was gone. The darkness had been destroyed. It was over. Rachel collapsed to her knees, her hands trembling as she reached for the pieces of the pendant scattered around her. She ran, her fingers over the fragments, feeling an odd sense of peace wash over her. The pendant, the key to the curse, was no more. It had been shattered, its power extinguished, but as she sat there, staring at the pieces, a hollow feeling remained in her chest. Something deep inside her stirred, like a final question, a final whisper. Is it truly over? Rachel shook her head, trying to push the thought away. The battle had been long. She had sacrificed so much it was over, but something in the pit of her stomach twisted. Uneasy, she looked up at Michael, who had been standing by, watching Rogue. In silence, his face filled with fear, but also a glimmer of hope. His eyes met hers, and he walked over to her, his steps slow and cautious. "You did it," he whispered, kneeling beside her, his voice filled with disbelief and awe. You really did it." Rachel nodded weakly, her heart still racing. She reached for his hand, her fingers trembling as she intertwined them with his. "It's over," she said softly, more to herself than to him. "The curse, it's gone." Michael herself than to him. "The curse, it's gone." Michael squeezed her hand gently, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "You're free. We're both free for a moment." The two of them simply sat there, the world around them, silent and still. Rachel felt the warmth of Michael's presence. The weight of his love and support. She had broken the curse. She had freed herself and their bloodline from the shackles that had bound them for so long. But why did it still feel incomplete, as if in answer to her unspoken question? A faint sound broke the stillness, a soft whisper, a breath. A rustling in the air. Rachel's head shot up, her heart pounding in her chest. It wasn't possible. The curse, had it really been broken? Before she could fully react, a shadow appeared at the far end of the room, its form slowly taking shape. A figure emerged from the darkness this time. It wasn't the woman, the bride, nor was it the keeper. No, it was someone different. Man. Tall, dressed in dark robes, his face partially obscured by a hood. He moved toward them with an eerie calm. The very air around him seemed to shift, dark energy swirling like a storm. Who are you? Rachel demanded, her voice shaking, but full of defiance. What do you want? The man stopped just a few feet away, his eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. It is not over, Rachel, he said, his voice smooth, but filled with an unsettling power. The curse is broken, yes, but the darkness never truly die. Rachel's heart sank. She felt Michael's grip tighten on her hand, but she didn't pull away. What do you mean? We broke the curse. We destroyed the pendant. It's over. The man's lips twisted into a smile, dark and cold. The pendant was merely a key. The true curse lies within. It is not something you can simply destroy. His eyes locked onto Rachel's, his gaze unblinking, filled with an ancient knowing. The curse is part of your soul. It always has. Ben, the price of freedom is not just blood. It is your essence. The darkness lives within you, Rachel, and it always will. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She knew the truth now, the one she had been avoiding. She had thought the battle was over, but the true fight was still ahead. Michael stood beside her, protective but unsure. What do you want from us? He demanded. Leave her alone. She's already given everything. The man's smile widened. I'm not here to take anything more from her. I am simply here to remind her the darkness cannot be separated from the light. You cannot destroy what you core. Rachel stood, her body trembling, but she refused to back down. No, I refuse to accept that. I won't let it control me anymore. The man's gaze softened just for a moment, as if acknowledging her strength. You are strong, Rachel. Give you that. But you will always be bound to it. The darkness will be your shadow, and one day you will have to choose. Rachel took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words. I've made my choice, she said, her voice firm. Fight. And I'll never let it take me again. The man nodded slowly, as if accepting her answer. Very well, he said, his voice like a distant echo. But remember, Rachel, the choice is always yours. And with that, he faded into taller shadows, leaving Rachel and Michael alone in the room once again. The shadows lingered long after the man's form had faded into nothingness. Rachel stood there, her heart pounding in her chest, her body trembling as the weight of his words sank in. The darkness will always be a part of you. She could feel the truth of it, the terrifying reality that the curse, whatever it had truly been, wasn't just some external force she could fight and destroy. It was tied to her, woven into her very, very soul. Rachel, Michael's voice pulled her back from her spiraling thoughts. He was standing beside her, his face filled with concern, his eyes searching hers. What just happened? Who was that? She swallowed hard, shaking her head. I don't know, but he's right, Michael. Her voice trembled with the weight of what she had just learned. The curse. It was never just about the pendant. It was about me, about my family. The darkness lives within me, and no matter how much I fight it, it's always going to be there. Michael's face twisted with grief, and he reached out, taking her hands into his. We'll figure this out. We'll find a way to keep it at bay. Together. Rachel squeezed his hands, her heart aching. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. But deep down, the fear gnawed at her. The curse was not just something to be fought. It was part of her bloodline. Could she truly keep it under control? Would it always find its way back? Suddenly, there was a shift in the room, an almost imperceptible pull of energy. Like the air had grown heavier, charged with an unspoken presence. Rachel looked up, her senses alert, but there was nothing there. No shadows, no figures, just silence. The question loomed in her mind. Was the darkness gone, or had it simply retreated for now? Before she could process it further, Michael's voice broke through the tension again. Rachel, we need to leave. This place, this house, it feels wrong now. We don't belong here anymore. Rachel hesitated, looking around the room one last time. The house had been her family's home, and for so long it had felt like the center of the curse. But now, as she stood there, it felt like a tomb. The walls seemed to hold the echoes of the darkness she had fought, as if the house itself were unwilling to let go of the past. Right, she said softly, taking a final look at the shattered pieces of the pendant that lay on the floor. Let's go. As they made their way toward the door, Rachel felt the weight of the world pressing on her shoulders, and the world outside seemed far away, as though it had become a distant memory. The curse had not been destroyed. The battle had not been won, but there was still a path ahead. A path she would have to walk with Michael at her side. They left the house, stepping out into the cool night air. The sky above them was clear, the stars shining brightly, but something felt off. The world seemed different, like the ground beneath her feet was still shifting, like the echoes of the curse were still reverberating through the air. Where do we go now? Michael asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. Rachel took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the journey ahead of her. I don't know, she admitted, but I know we can stay here, not with the darkness still lurking. She paused. We're thinking about everything she had learned, about the truth she had uncovered. The Keeper had said that there would always be a choice. The darkness will always be a part of you, and yet Rachel knew she couldn't let that define her. She couldn't let the curse or whatever it was take her down that path. She would fight it every step of the way. We'll figure it out, Rachel said, looking at Michael, her voice filled with a new sense of resolve. We'll find a way to keep it a taut. Hey, we'll fight together, Michael. We've always fought together. Michael smiled at her, the look in his eyes filled with the same determination. Together. But just as they began to walk away from the house, Rachel felt it a sudden chill, colder than the night air, creeping up her spine. It was subtle at first, like a presence just beyond her reach. She tried to shake it off, but it grew stronger. Until she could no longer ignore it, Michael stopped beside her. His hand stopped beside her. His hand tightening around hers. Rachel, what's wrong? I don't know, she whispered. It's like something's watching us. Something's still here. The street was eerily quiet. No sounds of passing cars or distant voices. The only thing she could hear was the pounding of her own heart. Her inner gaze shot back toward the house, and in the distance, she could just make out a shadow at one of the windows. But there was no one there. Rachel, there's nothing there, Michael said, his voice reassuring, but Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them from the darkness. Something still waiting. She looked at him, her face pale. I don't think it's over, Michael. I think we're just at the beginning. The chill that had settled over Rachel and Michael grew more pronounced, like the very air around them had turned to ice. Rachel's breath caught in her throat as she instinctively took a step closer to Michael. She could feel the pull of the darkness once again, but this time it was different. This time it wasn't just in her past, it was here, watching them, waiting. Michael, Rachel whispered, her voice trembling. It's still here. I can feel it. We're not safe. It's not gone. Michael's grip on her hand tightened, and he looked around, scanning the empty street. The town was silent, too silent. It was as if the world itself had gone still, waiting for something to happen. Rachel turned her head to look back at the house. her stomach tightening in fear. "I don't see anything," Michael said, his voice trying to stay calm. "There's nothing there, Rachel." But Rachel knew better. The shadows in the house, the chill in the air, it was too much to ignore. She could feel it now, the sense of being, the ignore, the sense of being now, the sense of being now watched. The feeling of something lurking just beyond the veil, something that wasn't ready to give up on her yet. "What if it's still inside?" she whispered. "What if the curse hasn't been broken? What if it's still waiting?" Michael took a deep breath, his face filled with concern. "We can't go back there, Rachel. Whatever is left of the curse, we can't face it alone. We need help. We need to figure out what we're dealing with." Rachel nodded, her mind racing. "You're right. We need to get out of here. But where do we go? What if darkness follows us?" Michael looked at her, his gaze steady. "We find answers. We find someone who knows more about this than we do. This thing, whatever it is, can't just follow us forever. We have to fight it." The wind picked up, swirling around them in an eerie dance, and Rachel shivered, not just from the cold, but from the deep, unsettling feeling that clung to her soul. She looked at Michael, her eyes filled with fear, but also determination. They couldn't outrun this forever. Darkness wasn't something they could simply escape. It was tied to her bloodline. Suddenly, the faint sound of footsteps echoed from behind them. Slow, methodical, and then that laugh, the same hollow, chilling laugh that had tormented her in the ballroom, the one she thought she had escaped. It came from the darkness, cutting through the stillness of the night. Rachel's heart raced, and she whirled around, her pulse spiking in panic. There was no one there. The street was empty, but the laugh, it was growing louder. "Michael, we need to go now," Rachel said, her voice sharp, filled with urgency. Michael pulled her close, his arm around her waist as they began to walk faster, but the sound of footsteps followed them, growing louder and louder, as though the darkness was closing in around them. It was relentless, like the shadows themselves were chasing them. Then, a figure stepped out of the darkness ahead of them, its shape long and tall, layers ahead of them, its shape long and elongated, like something unnatural, distorted. The figure moved slowly, deliberately, its face obscured by shadows. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't make out any details, but she felt its presence, the same malevolent force that had been haunting her for so long. "Who are you?" Rachel demanded, her voice shaky but defiant. The figure tilted its head slightly, its movements slow and deliberate. It didn't answer. Instead, it took a step forward, and Rachel felt the air grow even colder, the weight of its presence pressing down on her like a vice. "Rachel," Michael said urgently, his voice filled with fear. "We need to run, now." But Rachel didn't move. She was frozen in place, her eyes locked onto the figure in front of her. There was something familiar about it, something that made her stomach churn, and then the figure spoke not in words, but in an eerie, chilling whisper that seemed to come from all around them. "You cannot escape what you are. The curse is not broken. It never was." Rachel's heart skipped a beat as the realization hit her. The darkness wasn't gone. It had merely bided its time, and now it was back. Stronger, more powerful than before. "Run!" Rachel shouted, pulling Michael's arm, her voice filled with panic. But as she turned to flee, the shadows closed in, surrounding them. The air seemed to shimmer, distorting as the figure moved closer, its form flickering in and out of existence. "You cannot outrun me. You are mine." Rachel's pulse hammered in her ears as she stumbled backward, her mind racing. The curse had not just been a force. It was something alive, something that could move, shift, adapt. It had always been a part of her, and now it was coming for her once again. She turned to Michael, her eyes filled with fear. We can't keep running. We need to fight. Michael's face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. But how, Rachel? How do we fight something we can't even see? The figure took another step forward, its presence overwhelming. Rachel felt the pull, like invisible hands grasping at her soul, dragging her toward it. She tried to fight it, to push against it, but the more she struggled, the stronger the pull became. And then the figure spoke again, its voice like a cold whisper in her ear. You will never escape. The darkness will always find you. Rachel's body went rigid, her heart pounding as the realization hit her. The curse was not just a force that followed her. It was a force that had become a part of her. She couldn't outrun it. She couldn't outrun it. She couldn't escape it. It was her destiny. The darkness pressed in closer, the air heavy with its presence. And just as she thought she might succumb to it, a flash of light exploded from her chest, lighting up the shadows that had surrounded them. It wasn't the pendant this time. It was Rachel herself. The light was hers, a force that had been waiting, growing, waiting for this moment. The darkness recoiled, the figure faltering as the light pushed it back. Rachel gasped, her body shaking as the energy surged through her, filling her with strength she hadn't known she had. No, the figure whispered, its voice fading as the light intensified. You cannot fight me. But Rachel didn't listen. She raised her hands, the light growing stronger, pushing the darkness further back. We'll see about that, she whispered, her voice steady with newfound power. The light surged from Rachel's chest like a beacon, an ethereal glow that pushed back the shadows, their form flickering and writhing as they tried to retreat. She could feel the power coursing through her veins, the energy radiating out from her with every heartbeat, filling the very air with a brilliant warmth that fought back the cold. The figure in front of her, the embodiment of the curse, staggered, its form flickering in and out of existence as though it couldn't hold its shape. Against the light, it hissed in agony, but there was no voice, no sound except the hollow whisper of its presence in the air. You cannot banish me, the figure hissed, its voice distorted, like 1,000 voices crying out at once. You belong to me. The curse is yours to carry. It has always been yours. Rachel's grip tightened as she focused on the light that emanated from her. The darkness tried to envelop her again, but the light only grew brighter, stronger, pushing back the darkness like a wave breaking against the shore. Her hands shook, but she stood firm, the weight of the curse in her bloodline heavier than ever before. No, Rachel said, her voice trembling but determined. It ends here. I won't let you control me anymore. The figure's form flickered again, growing more unstable. You don't understand, Rachel? It whispered, its voice faltering as the light continued to push it back. This is not something you can destroy. The curse is not something you can destroy. The curse is not just a spell, it is fate. It is your blood, your essence. You can never be free of it. It is a part of you. Rachel took a step forward, her heart pounding, but her resolve hardening with every word. Maybe it's part of me, but it doesn't define me, she said fiercely. I choose my future. I choose to break free from you. With that, she raised her hands high, summoning the light that now burned within her, gathering it all in one final push. The figure before her screamed, its form unraveling as the light consumed it. For a brief moment, Rachel could feel the darkness clawing at her, trying to pull her back, but the power of the light surged, growing more intense until with a deafening crack, the darkness shattered. Rachel staggered, gasping for breath, as the figure disintegrated into nothingness, its presence vanishing into the air. The room around them felt suddenly still, the oppressive weight lifting as the light began to fade, leaving only silence in its wake. For a long moment, Rachel stood there, her body trembling with exhaustion. Her chest heaved with the force of her breathing, her mind racing to process what had just happened. The light was gone, but she could still feel its power within her, like a residual warmth that lingered in the air. Michael stepped forward cautiously, his eyes wide with concern, but there was awe in them as well. He had witnessed the entire battle, the force of the light and the darkness clashing with an intensity he couldn't fully comprehend. "Rachel, is it over?" he asked softly, his voice filled with both hope and doubt. Rachel closed her eyes, her hands still shaking, but her mind clearer than ever. The darkness had been destroyed, and for the first time in so long, she felt a flicker of peace. It wasn't just the curse that had been shattered. It was the bond that had tied her to it, the shadow that had haunted her family for generations. "I think so," she whispered, her voice trembling, "but I don't know for sure." Michael moved closer, his hand gently resting on her arm. "We did it, Rachel. It's gone." Rachel nodded, but deep inside, she felt a lingering uncertainty. The darkness might have been banished, but she knew better than anyone that the battle between light and shadow was never truly over. She would have to keep fighting, keep facing the choices that would define her future. But for now, for this moment, the darkness had been pushed back. And that, at least, was enough. "I think it's over. For now," she said softly, her gaze meeting Michael's. "But I'm not done fighting. I never will be." Rachel's words echoed in the quiet room, and though the immediate danger had passed, a sense of unease still lingered in the air. She and our favors. Michael stood in the stillness, but the weight of their victory felt distant, like something just out of reach. "Where do we go from here?" Michael asked, his voice a quiet murmur in the otherwise silent room. He was still processing what had just happened, and Rachel could see the hesitation in his eyes. The battle had been fierce, but there was still so much uncertainty ahead. Rachel glanced around the room. The walls that had once felt so heavy with the curse now seemed oddly empty, like a void left behind. It was as if the very air itself had shifted. The shadows, though gone, still left an impression on her mind, the memory of their presence as sharp as ever. "I don't know," Rachel admitted, her voice low. "I thought I had destroyed it. But what if the darkness comes back, even worse than before?" Michael reached out and gently cupped her face, lifting her chin to meet his eyes. "You fought it, Rachel. You broke the cycle, and you will keep fighting, but not alone. We'll figure out what comes next, together." Rachel swallowed, nodding slowly, but there was a gnawing feeling in the back of her mind, a quiet doubt that refused to be silenced. Michael had been there through everything, supporting her, standing by her side. But was it enough? Was it truly over, or was the darkness just waiting for the right moment to strike again? "Michael, I can't help but feel like something still isn't right," Rachel said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The curse may be gone for now, but what if it was just a manifestation of something greater, something darker?" Michael's grip on her arm tightened slightly, his face filled with concern. "What do you mean? You think there's something more to it?" Rachel took a deep breath. The curse was just a symptom, wasn't it? The darkness, whatever it is, has always been tied to my family. To me. I feel like we've only scratched the surface. I need to know more, Michael. I need to understand what we're really up against." Michael's brow furrowed, but he nodded in earnest agreement. "Then we'll find out. We'll get the answers we need. We've come this far, Rachel. We're not stopping now." Rachel looked into his eyes, searching for the reassurance she desperately needed. He was right. They couldn't stop now. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. But deep inside, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that the fight was far from over. As they stood there, the sound of a door creaking open in the distance broke the silence. and both Rachel and Michael froze, turning toward the sound. A figure stepped into the room, the silhouette dark against the faint light that lingered from the remnants of the pendant's glow. It was a woman, her face pale, her clothes ragged, her eyes glowing faintly with an unnatural light. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. She had seen this woman before, or at least, she had seen her image, the bride, the one who had haunted her family's bloodline for generations. The woman's lips curled into a twisted smile, a cold, eerie expression that sent a chill down Rachel's spine. "You thought you had destroyed it," the woman said, her voice low and haunting, "but the darkness is never gone. It is inside you." Rachel took a step back, her pulse quickening. No, you're not real. You can't be here." "Oh, but I am," the woman whispered, stepping closer, her form flickering in and out of the shadows. "I am the first of the curse, the one who started it all, and I will start it all. Always be here. The darkness never leaves. It chooses." Michael moved in front of Rachel, his stance protective, but the woman's presence seemed to press down on them like an unrelenting weight. "The curse chose me," Rachel whispered. "Her?" Rachel whispered, her voice thick with realization. "The bloodline, the pendant. It was all meant to be. It's tied to me. I can't run from it." The woman's eyes gleamed with malevolent satisfaction. "Exactly. You can never escape your destiny. You are mine, Rachel, and the darkness will consume you, just as it has consumed all those before you." "No," Rachel shouted, her voice filled with defiance. "I won't let it take me. I've broken free from you. The curse is gone." The woman let out a chilling laugh, her eyes glowing brighter as she stepped closer, her voice becoming a low hiss. "You can fight all you want, Rachel. You can struggle, but the curse is you. The darkness is you. You cannot defeat what is inside of you." Rachel's breath quickened. She could feel the pressure mounting, the weight of the darkness threatening to pull her under again. But she couldn't let it happen. Not now, not after everything she had fought for. "I want be or gone," Rachel spat, her voice shaking but filled with resolve. "I will control it. I will make the choice. The curse can't define me anymore." The woman's smile faded, and for the first time, there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "You think you can control it? You think you can control me?" Rachel's hands began to glow with a soft, golden light again, her power surging in response to the woman's challenge. She could feel it now, the strength inside her, the light that had been awakened by the battle. She wasn't just a vessel for the curse. She could fight it. She could choose how to wield it. "You are not my master," Rachel said firmly, her voice strong. "I choose my path. I choose my fate." The woman recoiled, her eyes widening in disbelief as Rachel's light flared brighter, pushing back the shadows that had gathered in the room. The figure began to flicker, its form warping, but it didn't disappear entirely. Instead, it seemed to dissolve into the air, leaving behind a dark, lingering presence, a reminder that the battle was not yet over. Rachel stood tall, her body trembling with the aftermath of the confrontation, but her heart felt lighter. She had made the choice. She had taken control. Michael stepped toward her, his voice soft and reassuring. "You're stronger than you think, Rachel. We're stronger together." Rachel nodded, her gaze turning toward the horizon. The darkness would always be a part of her, but now she could see the light. The battle was far from over, but she had the strength to face whatever came next. The room remained still, but Rachel could feel the weight of the darkness lingering in the air like an oppressive fog. The figure had faded, but its presence had left a mark on her, a reminder that the curse was never truly gone, no matter how much she fought against it. "I can't keep running," Rachel whispered, her voice trembling as she looked out into the darkened world beyond. The city was still, the streets quiet, but she felt as if she could sense the eyes of the curse on her, lurking, waiting, as though it was simply biding its time. Michael, ever by her side, stepped closer, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You don't have to run, Rachel. You're not alone in this. We'll face it together. We always have." Rachel closed her eyes, trying to steady her breath. She knew Michael would stand by her, no matter what. But she also knew that the curse was not something they could simply escape. It was tied to her bloodline, and no matter how much she wished it would vanish, she had to accept that it was a part of her, always. "We need to find answers," Rachel said quietly, her voice determined. "I don't know what I'm fighting anymore. I don't know if I'm fighting the curse, or if I'm fighting myself. But we need to figure this out. I can't keep going in circles." Michael nodded, his face a mixture of concern and unwavering support. "We will, find the answers, whatever it takes. But you don't have to do this alone." Rachel gave him a small smile, grateful for his words, but a knot of uncertainty still twisted in her gut. She couldn't deny it any longer. The curse wasn't just some outside force. It was a part of her, and that meant the fight was far from over. "I've been thinking," Rachel continued, her mind working quickly, "about my grandmother's journals, the things she wrote. There has to be more in there, more answers. Something that can tell us what the curse really is, and how to stop it. For good." Michael glanced at her, his eyes bright with determination. "We'll find them. If there's something in those journals that can help, we'll dig journals that can help. We'll dig through every page until we understand it. And we'll make sure this ends once and for all." Rachel took a deep breath and nodded. "I have to know the truth, Michael. I have to understand why this curse was bound to my family. Why it chose me." They stood there for a moment longer, both lost in their thoughts, before Rachel turned to head toward the door. As she reached for the handle, the weight of everything that had happened seemed to press on her shoulders, but she couldn't stop on her shoulders. But she couldn't stop. Now, she couldn't let the curse win. The journey was far from over. They made their way through the quiet streets of the town, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the night air. The once familiar roads now seemed strange, as if the world itself had shifted, leaving them in a different reality. Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching them, that the curse was still lurking just beyond the horizon. When they reached the old house, the place where her grandmother had once lived, Rachel felt a wave of nostalgia mixed with dread. The house was just as it had always been, quiet, abandoned, yet strangely welcoming. The old windows stared back at them, as though waiting to reveal their secrets. "This is it," Rachel whispered, her hand trembling as she reached for the door. "This is where it all started." Michael stood beside her, his presence a steady reassurance. "We'll find what we need here, whatever it takes." They stepped inside, the familiar creak of the floorboards greeting them as they made their way through the house. Dust filled the air, and the scent of aged wood and old books lingered. It was quiet here, almost too quiet, and Rachel felt a pang of unease as they made their way to the study, the room where her grandmother had spent countless hours writing, searching for answers of her own. The old desk was still there, buried under piles of yellowed papers and old books. Rachel's heart beat faster as she sifted through the clutter, trying to find the journal, trying to find the truth. Her fingers brushed over the worn leather cover of an old book, and she pulled it out, her breath catching as she saw the familiar handwriting inside. "I found it," Rachel said softly, her voice filled with a mixture of excitement and dread. Michael stepped closer, his eyes scanning the page as Rachel flipped through the journal. The entries were filled with observations, notes about strange occurrences, and cryptic messages. Her grandmother had written about the curse, about the bloodline, about the darkness that had haunted their family for generations. But there was something else in the journal, a warning. Rachel stopped at one of the final pages, her eyes widening as she read the words aloud. The curse cannot be destroyed, for it is not a force that can be erased. It is tied to the very essence of our family, our bloodline. It can only be contained, sealed away, and guarded for as long as we are willing to carry it. But the time will come when one will be chosen to either embrace it or be consumed by it. The choice is never truly theirs to make. Rachel's hand trembled as she turned the page, but the journal ended there. No more answers, no more clarity. What does this mean? Michael asked, his voice filled with concern. If it can't be destroyed, what are we supposed to do? Rachel stared at the journal, feeling the weight of her grandmother's words. The curse couldn't be destroyed. It could only be contained. But how? And who would be the one to bear that burden forever? I don't know, she whispered, her voice filled with a deep, sinking dread. But I can't keep running. I have to face this. We both do. Rachel sat down at her grandmother's desk, the journal still open before her. The weight of the words she had read hung heavily in the air, an unshakable reminder that the curse was not something she could simply destroy. Her heart pounded as she tried to make sense of the final entry, the cryptic warning that seemed to hang over her like a dark cloud. The curse cannot be destroyed. The realization gnawed at her insides. How could she have been so naive to think that breaking the pendant would be enough to end it? The darkness that had haunted her family for centuries wasn't just an external force. It was something deeply embedded in their very essence. It was tied to her bloodline, to her very being. Michael knelt beside her, his hand gently resting on her shoulder, his voice soft but filled with concern. Rachel, we'll find a way. We always do. She looked up at him, the uncertainty in her eyes reflecting the fear that she had buried deep inside. What if there is no way out, Michael? What if there is no way out, Michael? What if this is just how it is? The curse. It's part of me. It always has been. Michael took a deep breath, his grip tightening on her shoulder. That may be true, but that doesn't mean it has to control you. We've already fought it. We've already taken steps to break. Its hold, and we'll keep fighting it no matter what. Rachel closed her eyes, her fingers tracing the edge of the journal. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that there was still hope, that they could break free from the darkness. But deep inside, a voice whispered that she had already been marked, that no matter how hard she fought, the darkness would always find a way to return. Maybe we need to look deeper, Rachel said, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. Maybe my grandmother knew more than this. Maybe there's something else, something hidden in these journals, something we haven't seen yet. Michael nodded, his expression determined. We'll go through every page if we have to. We'll find the answers. Rachel smiled weakly, grateful for his unwavering support. But as she turned the pages of the journal, she found nothing new. The entries became increasingly fragmented, filled with references to old rituals and strange symbols, but nothing that would give her the clarity she needed. The further she read, the more she realized that her grandmother had been chasing shadows, trying to understand a curse that was impossible to fully comprehend. As Rachel closed the journal, a sudden coldness washed over her. The air seemed to shift, and she could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She looked around the room, her heart skipping a beat. The silence was oppressive. The kind of silence that came just before something terrible happened. Michael, she whispered, her voice shaking. I feel it. It's here. Before Michael could respond, A loud crash echoed from the back of the house, followed by the unmistakable Fronde sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming closer. Rachel's breath caught in her throat as she turned toward the sound. She could feel the darkness returning, like a shadow creeping up behind her, wrapping around her throat. "No, can't be," Rachel muttered, rising to her feet. "It's not possible." The footsteps grew louder, closer, and then the door to the study slammed open, revealing a figure standing in the doorway. It was the bride, the woman who had haunted her family for generations. But this time, she was different. Her once pale, ghostly form now seemed more corporeal, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light, her smile twisted in a grotesque parody of joy. There was no mistaking it now. This wasn't just a ghost. This was something more. "You think you can escape me, Rachel?" The woman's voice echoed through the room, sharp and filled with malice. "You think you can break the curse?" Rachel's heart hammered in her chest. The darkness was back, and this time, it wasn't just a fleeting nightmare. The curse had found its way back into her life, more powerful than ever. "I won't let you control me," Rachel shouted. Her voice filled with fierce defiance. "I will fight you until the end." The woman's laughter echoed in the room, cold and unrelenting. "Fight all you want. You cannot fight what is already inside you. The curse is not something you can destroy. Part of you, Rachel. It always has been." Rachel's hands clenched into fists, her body trembling with the weight of the words. The woman's figure flickered, and in the blink of an eye, she was standing right in front of Rachel, her cold breath brushing against her face. "I am the curse," the woman whispered, her voice dripping with venom. "I am the darkness, the one that has always been with you, and I will never leave." Rachel closed her eyes, her chest rising and falling. With every breath, she couldn't escape it. She couldn't fight it alone. But there had to be a way, there had to be some way to break the curse for good. With a sudden surge of determination, Rachel stepped back and grabbed the journal once more, her fingers flying through the pages. She had to find something, anything that could help them. Her mind raced as she flipped through the old pages, her eyes scanning the cryptic symbols and notes left behind by her grandmother. And then, as if behind by her grandmother, a light bulb had flickered on in her mind. She stopped at a page near the back, a symbol, a circle with 3 interlocking lines. Rachel's heart skipped a beat as she realized what it was, an ancient sigil. Her grandmother had written about it briefly, but the significance had never been clear. "This," Rachel whispered, her voice trembling with realization. "This is the key." The woman's figure began to flicker again, her form dissipating into shadow. But Rachel wasn't afraid anymore. She understood now. The sigil was the answer. It was the way to finally break the curse for good. "Michael," Rachel said, her voice filled with urgency, "I need you to help me. We need to use this sigil to break the curse. It's the only way." Michael stepped forward, his face filled with both fear and resolve. "What do we need to do?" Rachel looked down at the journal, her hands shaking as she traced the sigil. "We need to perform the ritual. It will seal the curse away, for good, but we have to do it together. If we fail," Rachel's voice faltered, the weight of the task before them heavy in her chest. They had to succeed. This was their last chance. The air in the room felt thick with anticipation as Rachel and Michael stood together, the journal opened between them. The sigil was drawn in the pages, its meaning now clear but daunting. The ritual was their last hope. The curse had lingered for too long, and now it was up to them to sever the bond forever. Rachel's fingers trembled as she traced the lines of the sigil, feeling the power within it stir. It was old, ancient, even. Her grandmother had known about it. had written about it in cryptic phrases. The sigil was more than just a symbol. It was a key to unlocking the final step, the one that could seal the curse away. But the ritual a curse away wasn't just about power. It required something deeper, something only Rachel could provide. "I can't do this alone, Michael," Rachel said quietly, her voice filled with both fear and resolve. "We have to do it together." Michael nodded, his face set with determination. "I'll stand by you, Rachel. We've been through everything together. We can do this." Rachel took a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. The curse had nearly destroyed her, but now, with Michael at her side, she felt stronger than she ever had before. She could feel the darkness still clinging to her, but she also knew that she was the key to ending it. The sigil was only the beginning. "Let's do it," Rachel whispered, her voice firm. Now. We begin the ritual at midnight. That's when the curse is weakest." Michael nodded. "We'll be ready." As midnight approached, the atmosphere in the room became heavier. The wind outside picked up, howling against the windows, as if warning them of what was to come. Rachel stood before the sigil, the candles placed around the room flickering, casting long, shifting shadows against the walls. The journal was open on the table, the sigil glowing faintly, almost as if it were alive. Rachel felt a cold shiver run down her spine, but she didn't allow fear to take hold. She had come this far. There was no turning back now. "Are you ready?" Michael asked, his voice steady, but Rachel could hear the edge of fear in it. This was their final chance. "I'm ready," Rachel said, her heart steady. She couldn't let herself falter now. They moved into position, each of them standing, each of them standing opposite the sigil. Rachel closed her eyes, her hands trembling slightly as she reached out to place her palms above the symbol. She could feel the power within it, ancient, raw, and untapped. As her fingers hovered above the sigil, she felt the darkness begin to stir again. The air grew colder, and the room seemed to darken, like the shadows themselves were reaching for her. But she pushed it away. She had to focus. This was her choice. She was no longer afraid. The room fell, silent as Rachel began to chant the words written in her grandmother's journal. They were in an ancient language, one that Rachel had never fully understood, but as she spoke them aloud, she could feel the power of the ritual building. The sigil began to glow, brighter now, its light pulsating with the rhythm of her words. Michael stood by her side, his own hands hovering above the sigil, silently echoing the chants. His presence beside her was a steady reminder that she wasn't alone in this. Together, they could finish what had begun centuries ago. As the ritual progressed, the temperature in the room dropped, and Rachel felt the presence of the curse growing stronger. The shadows began to shift, swirling around them. But they couldn't stop. The sigil was their only hope. They had to finish it, no matter what. The woman, the embodiment of the curse, appeared once more, her figure flickering in the darkness. Her eyes were glowing with malevolent power. Her face twisted into a cruel smile. "You cannot escape me," she hissed, her voice filled with rage. "The curse is eternal. It will always return to you. You cannot break it." But Rachel didn't flinch. She could feel the energy building inside her, the power of the sigil working with her, not against her. This time, the darkness would not claim her. "I choose my path," Rachel said, her voice strong. "This curse ends tonight?" The woman shrieked in fury, her form writhing as the sigil began to glow even brighter. The darkness around them intensified, the air crackling with raw energy. The woman lunged toward Rachel, but Michael stepped forward, his hand raised as if to protect her. "Rachel, focus," Michael urged. "We're almost there. Rachel nodded, her eyes locked on the sigil. She could feel the darkness tugging at her, trying to pull her back into the void. But she held her ground this time. She wouldn't let it win. With a final, forceful chant, she wouldn't let it win. Rachel and Michael pressed their palms down onto the sigil, and the room erupted in a blinding light. The shadows screamed as they were pulled back, the curse unraveling before their very eyes. Rachel could feel the darkness dissipating, like a weight being lifted from her shoulders, the curse finally losing its grip. The woman's form flickered one last time, her scream filling the room before she disappeared completely, leaving only silence behind. For a moment there was nothing but the stillness of the room. Rachel's body trembled with exhaustion, her mind racing. Had they done it? Was it truly over? Rachel? Michael's voice was soft, but filled with hope. She opened her eyes, blinking against the fading light. The sigil had stopped glowing, the room now completely silent. She felt lighter, freer than she had in years. The darkness was gone. The earth curse was no longer part of her bloodline. I think we did it, Rachel whispered, her voice filled with wonder. Michael stepped forward, his hands gently taking hers. It's over, Rachel. We're free. But as the silence settled around them, Rachel's heart still held a small, lingering doubt. Was it truly over? Could the curse ever be fully defeated? Or was it something that would always return? As she gazed at Michael, the answer didn't matter as much. They had won. They had broken the curse. And together, they would face whatever came next. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Rachel felt a glimmer of hope. She had fought for her life, for her freedom, and now, for the first time, she could choose what came next. The room remained still, the faint glow from the ritual's light now fading into the soft amber of the candles. Rachel could feel the energy in the air dissipating, like the final remnants of the curse were being swept away. The weight that had pressed on her for so long, the constant pull of the darkness, was gone. For the first time, the silence felt different. It wasn't oppressive, but peaceful. She could feel Michael's presence beside her, and it was enough to make her breathe easier, to make her feel like, for once, everything might be okay. But deep inside, a part of Rachel couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the curse wasn't something that could just vanish. She knew better than anyone that darkness had a way of returning, of finding its way back into the light. She would always carry the burden of her bloodline. No matter how much she fought it, she would always be tied to the curse in some way. Michael, she whispered, her voice still soft from the ritual. Do you think it's really over? Do you think we've really broken the cycle? Michael turned to face her, his eyes filled with a tenderness that she had grown so accustomed to. I don't know what the future holds, Rachel, but I do know one thing: we've done everything we could, and we'll keep doing it together. We've faced worse than death, and we're still standing. Rachel smiled faintly, leaning into him as she let out a shaky breath. I hope you're right. They stood there for a moment, the silence between them comfortable, but Rachel couldn't ignore the whispers in the back of her mind. The curse had been a part of her life for so long, tied to her bloodline, tied to the darkness that had plagued her family for generations. She wasn't sure she would ever feel truly free. I can't help but wonder, Rachel began, her voice uncertain. What if there's more to this than just the curse? What if there's something else, something bigger, that we haven't seen yet? Michael's expression grew serious. What do you mean? Michael's expression grew serious. What do you mean? Rachel hesitated, the weight of her words heavy on her tongue. The woman, the curse, she said, I couldn't escape it, that the darkness was inside me. What if there's more? What if this is just the beginning? Michael's brow furrowed, but he reached out to take her hand. We'll find out, Rachel. But we won't face it alone. I'm not going anywhere. Rachel nodded, but her mind was racing. There were still so many unanswered questions. What had truly unanswered questions? What had truly unanswered questions caused the curse? Why had it been passed down through her family for so many generations? And what did the woman, the embodiment of the curse, mean when she said Rachel would always be tied to it? The uncertainty gnawed at her. But for the first time, Rachel didn't feel completely overwhelmed by it. She had fought the darkness, and she had won. And now, she had the strength to face whatever came next. The next day, Rachel and Michael left the old house, the place where it had all begun. They had finally broken free from the curse, but something still felt unfinished. Rachel knew she couldn't go back to the life she had before. She couldn't just forget everything that had happened. The curse had shaped her, had defined her, but now she had a choice. She could choose her own path, her own future. They made their way into the town, Rachel feeling a strange sense of finality. The town, though familiar, felt different now, like it had been a part of her past she was ready to leave behind. The shadows that once haunted her felt like they had faded, but she knew the journey ahead was still uncertain. As they walked together, hand in hand, Rachel walked together, hand in hand. Rachel couldn't help but glance over at Michael. He was right beside her, as he always had been. No matter what came next, they would face it together. "Where do we go from here?" she asked softly, her voice filled with a mix of hope and apprehension. Michael smiled, a soft, reassuring smile that made her heart flutter. "We go forward, Rachel. We make our own future." Rachel nodded, the weight of his words settling in her chest. They were free. They'd broken the curse, and now they could finally choose their path. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. As Rachel and Michael stepped forward into their new future, the lingering question still hovered in the air. Was the darkness truly gone, or was it simply waiting for the right moment to return? The curse had been broken, but Rachel knew that darkness had a way of following. The choice she made today would shape her tomorrow. Would she be able to truly escape the shadows, or would they always be a part of her? The journey was far from over.